Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another chilling episode. If you have your own terrifying experience to share, please mail us to be featured in our next episode. So before we dive in, please subscribe to our small channel and leave a comment, letting me know which country you are listening from. So without further ado, let's begin the story. I've always loved hiking. There's something about it. Maybe it's the rhythm of your own breath against silence, or the way the trees seem to listen without judgment. I grew up on it. My dad took me on my first trail in the Cascades when I was 7, and I never stopped. So when my friend Kyle sent a group text about planning a 5-day hike deep in the Oregon backcountry, I said yes without thinking. Looking back, though, I should have asked more questions. There were 4 of us: me, Josh, Kyle the planner, Rachel, my ex, now just a friend, kind of, and Dan, Kyle's cousin, who none of us knew very well. We'd all done long treks before, though never together like this. Kyle was always the one with All Trails maps printed in plastic sleeves, topographical overlays highlighted, compass clipped to his pack like a badge. Rachel had soloed parts of the Appalachian Trail. Dan, he claimed he was ex-search and rescue, which made us feel more secure, even if he didn't talk much. The plan was simple on paper. Meet in Eugene. Drive 3 hours south to a remote section of national forest that Kyle swore had the clearest skies and the emptiest trails. It wasn't on the usual ranger station maps. I remember Kyle grinning like a kid on Christmas, flipping through an old, coffee-stained guidebook and pointing at a faint dashed line that faded between 2 ridges. "It's not even listed anymore," he said, tapping the spot. "But it used to be maintained decades ago, maybe longer. Called it the Ember Trail. Said he'd read about it on a forum for abandoned paths." We all packed our gear light but tidy hydrated meals, hammocks, filter straws, a solar charger for our phones, even though reception would probably vanish by day 2. Rachel brought her dad's old Nikon for atmospheric shots. Had one of those minimalist packs but somehow still carried a hatchet. I brought a notebook. I always keep one. Just for small stuff. Thoughts, sketches, names of birds I don't recognize, that kind of thing. We set out just before dawn on a Tuesday. There was no official trailhead. We parked Kyle's Subaru on the edge of a gravel pull-off and hopped a rusted gate that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. From there, the woods swallowed us. I don't mean that poetically. I mean within minutes. The trees closed in, like a curtain. You could see maybe 30 feet in any direction before the moss-draped branches and slanted trunks took over. But the air was clean, cool. It smelled like pine and wet stone. The ground was soft, even springy, with a thick bed of needles that silenced every step. Kyle led the way with his GPS in hand. The Ember Trail wasn't marked anymore, but the terrain matched what he'd planned: a narrow saddle between 2 hills, then a slow descent into a shallow valley. Nothing weird? Not yet. "I love this already," Rachel said at one point, smiling like the girl I remembered from our second year of college. She was taking pictures of fungus growing up the side of a tree. These perfect orange fans with ridged undersides. It feels ... older here. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't want to break the moment. That first night, we camped near a creek with rocks worn smooth as bones. We made a small fire with dry twigs and told stories like we were 13 again. Kyle pulled out a flask of bourbon. Rachel roasted a marshmallow on her spork. Even? Don cracked a smile when Kyle imitated a bear that apparently chased him out of a pit toilet once. It felt good. Real. I remember thinking, maybe this trip will be good for me. I'd been feeling unmoored lately. Quit my job at the brewery, canceled my lease in Portland, floated through gigs. Maybe this was what I needed. Trees, silence. People who remembered me from before everything got complicated. That night, I slept with my hammock strung between 2 big-bellied firs. The moon was bright through the canopy, bright enough to see the outlines of my boots tucked beneath me. I drifted off to the sound of Rachel's quiet snoring and the wind threading through the needles. The second day, we hiked deeper. The landscape began to shift. Subtly, we didn't notice it at first, but the trees seemed tilted, like they all leaned slightly toward the path, as if curious. or listening. The trail itself, if you could call it, that was more like a memory of one. Barely visible ridges under the underbrush, odd breaks in the ferns. Kyle swore the GPS still matched the route, even though none of us could see a clear line anymore. Old trails move, he said, or the forest moves around them. I thought he was being poetic. Now I wonder. I'll skip the boring stuff, more hiking, more photo ops, Dan being weirdly quiet, but that night. Something small happened. Something that didn't feel like anything. Yet, when I opened my pack to grab my headlamp, it was gone. Buried, gone. I'm not the kind of person who misplaces gear. I pack tight. I have a system. The headlamp lives in the top pouch always. But it wasn't there. Rachel offered hers, but I felt off. Like I was being tested and had already failed. I used my phone flashlight and told myself I'd just dropped it earlier. Maybe at lunch. No big deal. We set up camp near a stand of trees shaped almost like a circle. I didn't think about that either. Circles feel safe in the woods, even though they shouldn't. We built another fire and ate freeze-dried pasta. Kyle checked the GPS again. Still working, still tracking. But the air felt thick that night. Close, like the forest had grown a layer. Around 2 a.m., I woke up sweating. I was cold before. I'd zipped my bag tight, but now it felt like July. I peeled back my sleeping bag and heard something. An animal. Not wind. It was a voice. Somewhere behind me, behind all of us. Whispering something that sounded almost like my name. I sat up in my hammock and strained to listen. Nothing. Just the creak, and maybe a branch swaying overhead. I didn't wake the others. I told myself it was a dream. One of those half-awake moments where your brain fills in gaps with nonsense. That was the only time it happened. Or so I thought. But when we woke up, Dan looked pale. I asked if he was all right, and he just shook his head. Heard something weird last night, he muttered. Probably nothing. That's when it hit me he'd heard it too. We started day 3 a little slower. Don was the last to pack up his gear, and he kept looking over his shoulder like he was waiting for something to move behind him. Kyle made a comment about the air getting thinner the deeper we got, but that didn't make any sense. We weren't gaining much elevation. If anything, we were descending into a basin. I didn't say anything, but I felt it too, this heaviness. Not like fear exactly, more like an ache behind the eyes. A weight in the chest that hadn't been there before. The woods were still beautiful, but something about them had changed. The trees were closer together now. Space between them tightened so gradually, we almost didn't notice. What should have been a 10-foot gap between trunks was now 5. The path, if you could call it that, narrowed into what felt like a rabbit trail. Winding through crooked trees that leaned overhead until they touched. Rachel even made a joke that the forest was hugging us. It didn't feel like a hug. It felt like a trap. It was around midday when Rachel realized her camera was missing. She had been taking shots non-stop since day 1. Bark textures, mushrooms, even weird moss patterns that looked almost like writing. But when we stopped for lunch and she reached for the Nikon in her front pouch, it was gone. She tore her pack apart twice, even dumped it out onto the moss. Nothing. She swore she zipped. It shut that morning. I remembered seeing her clip the strap through her chest buckle. But now it was just gone. Don muttered something under his breath about the forest taking what it wants. Kyle rolled his eyes and said she probably left it back at the last campsite. We offered to turn back and look, but Rachel shook her head. Her hands were shaking when she said, "No, I don't want to go back there." She wouldn't explain why. She just kept walking. That was when I started marking our position in my notebook. GPS coordinates, those didn't mean much. Out here, especially since Kyle's signal had started to flicker, I wrote down details. Tree with 3 trunks leaning west, flat rock with red lichen, birch with carved X. Little things that could help us retrace our steps. I didn't even realize how many of those marks we passed again later that day. Identical trees. Same rock, same carved X. At first I thought I was just bad at observing. But after the 3rd time I noted the same tree, it hit me we were looping. Kyle insisted we weren't. He showed us the GPS trail, the jagged little line that was still progressing forward. "We're fine," he said. "Too fast, too firm. Old-growth forests just look the same after a while. That's why people get lost. They panic and backtrack." But I saw the sweat under his beanie. I saw how tight he gripped the GPS, like it was the only thing holding him to reality. When we pressed him about how old this trail really was, if it was ever official, he clammed up, said some parts of the Ember Trail might have predated even. The earliest survey maps didn't like the way he said might have, like he didn't really know, like no one did. Later that afternoon, Rachel tripped on something sticking out of the ground. It looked like a piece of iron rebar, rusted and jagged, barely poking through the moss. Kyle said it might have been part of an old ranger post or fire tower long, since rotted away, but Rachel was bleeding. The cut on her shin wasn't deep, but it looked wrong. The blood clotted too fast, like syrup, and the skin around it turned a strange gray blue. She bandaged it and didn't say much, but I caught her wincing every few steps. That night, we camped without a fire. Too damp, Kyle said. But I think none of us wanted to draw attention to ourselves anymore. Woods had grown too quiet. No birds, no frogs, just wind. Except it wasn't wind, not really. Around midnight, I heard it again. My name whispered low and slow, stretched like it. Was moving through water. I sat up and saw Dan already awake, sitting cross-legged on the ground outside his tent, just staring into the trees. I asked what he was doing. He didn't turn around. He just said, "They sound like us." I didn't ask who they were. I didn't want to know. The next morning, Rachel's bandage was gone. It's not unwrapped. Gone. Like it was never there. Her wound was still there, gray-blue and wet-looking, but the gauze was missing. She asked if one of us had changed it, but no one had touched her. We were all too busy pretending to sleep. I went to grab some extra from my own med kit, only to find that most of my first aid gear was missing too. Bandages, ibuprofen, even my backup lighter. Kyle checked his own pack and cursed. His emergency beacon was gone. Kept it in a zippered pouch inside another pouch. No way it fell out. That's when we all started checking everything. Dan was missing his compass. Rachel's socks were gone. Kyle's extra power bank vanished. My notebook. Still, there but several pages had been torn out. Cleanly, no scraps left. Just the faint imprint of my own handwriting on the missing sheets. I should have been surprised when Kyle finally admitted the GPS wasn't working anymore. He tried to hide it at first, but by mid-morning, he gave up. The screen just blinked blank white. No matter how many times he reset it, this might be water damage, he muttered. But he didn't look like he believed that. I sure didn't. Dan pulled out a paper mapware. He got it. I don't know when started tracing a path back toward the car, but the map didn't make sense anymore.
Ow.
The rivers were in the wrong places, hills that were supposed to be gentle. Sloped had become steep drop-offs. Trails crisscrossed where there should have been none. Even the sun felt wrong rising later, setting earlier, shifting slightly off its usual angle. Rachel whispered, "What if we're not where we think we are?" No one answered her. We pressed on, more out of fear of stopping than anything else. Every so often, we heard rustling ahead of us, even when no wind was blowing. And once I swear I saw someone duck behind a tree, a figure that looked exactly like Dan. Same pack, same hat, same stride. But Dan was next to me at the time, sipping water. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was just shadows. But that night, I found a second copy of my bandana folded neatly next to my tent. I only brought one. I checked, I counted, still had mine tucked in my belt. So where did the second one come from? It smelled like me. It even had the coffee stain from the morning we left, but I hadn't left it out. I hadn't touched it since day one. It's when I started to feel it in my chest knot. Fear exactly, but a crawling, slinking kind of wrong. Like something was learning us, mimicking, trying to put the pieces together. Rachel wouldn't talk that night. She just stared at the trees until her eyes glazed over. Dan finally snapped and shouted into the forest, "What do you want?" His voice cracking halfway through. The echo came back slower than it should have. Not just late. Warped. As if it had passed through another mouth before reaching us. Again, the same words but drawn out, dry, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "What do you want?" I didn't sleep at all. Just lay in my hammock, clutching my knife, listening. The trees creaked like old floorboards. The wind shifted direction 5 times. And just before dawn, I swear I heard myself breathing. From somewhere behind me, the day we found the cabin, we weren't even looking for shelter. We'd started moving just after dawn, all of us too rattled by the night to say much. The trees looked even closer now, like they'd closed ranks. During our sleep, it wasn't just a feeling either. Some of the roots we'd stepped over the day before had shifted, curling like fingers reaching for our ankles. None of us wanted to admit it, but something was wrong with the forest. It's not haunted, worse aware. We were all acting different by then. Kyle stopped checking the GPS altogether, just stared at it blankly every hour or so, as if trying to will it back to life. Dawn kept falling behind, pausing to listen for things no one else could hear. Rachel barely spoke at all anymore, and when she did, it was usually in half whispers, as if she didn't want the woods to hear her. I was mostly trying to keep track of the time in my notebook, but even that had started to feel unreliable. We'd gone days without seeing the sun clearly. When it did show, it was pale and hung too low in the sky, as if it were late afternoon, even at noon. The moss on the trees was growing in the wrong directions. North didn't mean anything out there, so when Rachel pointed and said, "Is that a roof?" we all froze. We were in a shallow hollow by then, surrounded by twisted cedar trunks and ferns taller than my waist. And there it was, half hidden behind a slope, a structure slumping into the dirt like it was too tired to keep standing. It looked like a ranger's cabin, or maybe a fire watch outpost. But so old, it felt prehistoric. The wood was black with rot, the windows boarded or broken. There were rusted tools propped up near the doorway, an axe missing its handle, a lantern that looked like it hadn't held fuel since before we were born. The whole place reeked of sap, mildew, and something ... older. Not quite decay, but memory. Like a space that had been abandoned, not out of neglect, but fear. Kyle wanted to leave it alone. He said it might be unstable, unsafe. But none of us listened. We were tired, paranoid, hungry in a way that food packets couldn't touch. Needed shelter, answers, proof we weren't losing it. So Dan went first, kicking in the half-hinged door and stepping inside with his hatchet raised. The rest of us followed. The air inside was colder than outside, and it didn't smell any better. The floorboards groaned under our weight. The place had 1 room, maybe 2 if you counted the corner closet stand, no furniture left standing. Everything was either broken or molded over. But it wasn't empty. Not exactly. There were papers, dozens of them, strewn across the floor and pinned to the walls with rusted nails. Some were damp and stuck together, others faded from water. Damage, but a few were still legible. Kyle picked one up and read aloud. August 12th. Saw her again. Today, same face, same voice. Not Rachel, not real. We all stopped breathing. Leaked up slowly, and Rachel turned white as bone. "That's my name," she said, barely audible. We gathered around the wall where that paper had been pinned. And that's when we realized the notes weren't just random journal entries. They were logs. First-person accounts written by someone who had been through exactly what we were experiencing. Hearing whispers, seeing doubles, losing items, even the warped sense of direction. It was all there. Dated, chronicled, increasing. In urgency and paranoia, the name at the bottom of most of them was WT, sometimes just initials, other times full Walter Timms, if the name scrawled across the back of a water-stained ID card was accurate. It was a ranger decades ago. Maybe the last one to man this station before it was left to rot. But that wasn't the worst part. Rachel found a notebook stuffed into a drawer, still half intact. She opened it and flipped through the pages slowly, then stopped on one and handed it to me with shaking hands. There was a sketch rough, frantic. Lines, but enough detail to make out the scene. 4 figures in a clearing, surrounded by trees. One of them, wearing what looked like a wide-brimmed hat, was staring directly at the viewer. The other 3 were facing away, moving towards something shadowy. Above the sketch were words etched in what looked like pen at first. Realized they had texture, crusted, dried. Blood. It read, "They follow what they think they are, but they're not." We didn't stay long after that. Rachel started crying. Kyle kept saying we needed to reset, like this was some kind of game or simulation. Dan just stood in the corner, breathing through his mouth, muttering something. I couldn't make out. I remember stuffing a handful of the Ranger's pages into my notebook before we left, just to prove later, if there ever was a later, that we weren't imagining it. I also remember looking down as we left and seeing another note nailed near the door frame, one that hadn't been there when we entered. It was fresh, white paper. No mold, no age spots. The handwriting was small and familiar. It was mine. It simply read, "Don't trust your own voice." We left in silence. None of us could explain it. I checked my own notebook that night. The page with that same message, "Don't trust your own voice," was still there in my handwriting. But I had no memory of writing it. And worse, the one underneath had been torn out. I didn't do that. I knew I didn't. That page had a drawing I'd done of the tree line from 2 days before. I'd been proud of it. It was gone. Like someone or something was choosing which parts of us to keep, which to copy, which to erase. That night, we made camp without a word. No fire. No unpacking more than what we needed. I tied my hammock low to the ground and kept the hatchet near my side. Around midnight, Kyle woke up screaming, said he saw himself standing in the trees, not just a look-alike, a perfect mirror. Same clothes, same stance, even the same little scar under his chin from where he fell on a tent peg last year. The copy didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Kyle swore it mouthed the word home. Then it turned and walked into the woods. Rachel checked his face for fever. Dan asked if he'd taken anything. I just stared into the trees, trying to figure out how far I'd be willing to follow myself if I thought I saw me walking ahead. I didn't sleep at all that night, just listened. The voices didn't call out like before. This time they whispered nonsense. Backwards phrases. Rhythms that sounded almost like laughter, but twisted, soaked in static. I plugged my ears and prayed for daylight, even though I didn't trust daylight anymore either. In the morning, we were missing something else. Not gear this time, people. Dan was gone. His hammock was empty. His pack was still there. 2, but no Dan. Rachel found a note where his head should have been, tucked under his balled-up hoodie. It read, "Saw myself going home. Looked peaceful. Followed." Kyle insisted we search for him, but I said no. I didn't want to follow anything anymore. I didn't want to risk walking toward a voice that might sound like mine, or his, or anyone's, because by then, I understood. The forest wasn't just mimicking. It was rewriting, recasting, replacing, and now it had a copy of Dawn. One that walked, one that looked peaceful, one that might still be following us. We didn't speak much the morning after Dawn disappeared. No one wanted to admit what we were really thinking, that whatever took him, or whatever he followed, was close. Closer than we wanted to believe. Kyle kept pacing in tight circles near the remnants of our fire pit, muttering about leaving a wait away. Marker Rachel sat on a log, staring at Dan's pack like she could will him back just by looking. I kept scanning the tree line for movement, expecting him more, something wearing his face, to come walking out with that same calm expression, but nothing came. The woods were still. Too still. Even the bugs had stopped making noise. I remember listening for the usual rustle of chipmunks or distant birds and hearing nothing but my own breath, like the entire forest was holding something back. Kyle finally snapped out of his trance and announced we needed to turn back. No more looking for trails or landmarks, just a straight line out, due north. We'll bushwhack if we have to, he said, his voice cracking like he hadn't used it in years. I wanted to agree with him, but something inside me hesitated. I couldn't explain it, but the idea of moving in a straight line felt wrong, as if the forest had rearranged itself. In ways we hadn't noticed yet, still, what else were we going to do? Stay put and wait for the woods to take the rest of us. We moved fast that morning, faster than we had since the beginning. Rachel led for a while, knife in hand, carving slashes into the tree bark as markers. I kept checking my notebook, trying to find some kind of pattern in our surroundings. Anything familiar, but everything looked the same. Roots curled like veins, trunks scarred by age, and things I couldn't name. At one point, we stumbled into a clearing where dozens of bones, deer, raccoons, rabbits, were arranged in spirals, not freshly killed. Old, picked clean, and bleached white by time. But the layout, it wasn't natural. Something had placed. Them curated them. Kyle didn't even stop walking. He just muttered, "Don't look, don't stop." I followed him, but I kept my eyes on the pattern until the trees swallowed it up again. I wish I hadn't, because that spiral, I've started seeing it since, in dreams, in the way wires coil on my nightstand, even in the way the water swirls in my sink. We finally came across something human that afternoon, a sign. An actual metal sign nailed into a post with flaking white paint. It said Clearwater Trailhead in chipped red letters, and beneath that, 3.2 miles. Kyle dropped to his knees and laughed. Not joy, not relief.
Us.
It was the kind of laugh you make when your body's trying to cry but can't find the tears. "We're saved," he said, over and over again, like he needed to hear it to believe. I wasn't so sure. I'd never heard of the Clearwater Trailhead. I asked Rachel if she had. She shook her head slowly, biting her lip like she wanted to say something but couldn't. We followed the sign anyway. That trail was cleaner, straighter. It looked used, at least more than anything else we'd been walking. But the deeper we went, the more it started to twist again, not just directionally, but physically. The trees bent low, some of them unnaturally curved like they'd grown in a spiral. At one point, we had to duck under a fallen tree, and as I passed beneath it, I swear I heard someone whisper in my ear, "You're almost home." It was my own voice, not similar exact, same rasp, same cadence. I didn't tell the others. What was the point? We were already too deep. We made camp early that night. None of us had the energy to push on. Kyle was pale, shaking, and claimed he hadn't eaten all day. Rachel looked feverish, her hands twitching even at rest. I kept thinking about Dan, where he might be, whether he'd finally merged with whatever version of himself he saw in the trees, whether he'd be waiting for us if we ever made it out. I tried to write in my notebook, but when I opened it, half the pages were blank, not torn out blank. The ink had faded from entire entries. Even the sketches were gone. It was like I'd never written them in the first place. Like the forest was scrubbing parts of me out, editing me. Just after midnight, I heard footsteps circling our camp. Slow, deliberate, not animal. Too heavy. I grabbed my knife and crawled out of the hammock, expecting to see Kyle on watch. But he wasn't there. Neither was Rachel. The fire had died to embers. Everything felt wrong. Then I saw Rachel 10 feet away, standing motionless, facing the trees. I called to her once. She didn't respond. When I walked up and touched her shoulder, she turned to me with a blank stare and whispered, "It's not your turn yet." I blinked. And just like that, she was back infused, wide-eyed, asking why I was touching her. She didn't remember getting up. Didn't even know she'd left the hammock. Kyle didn't remember waking either. He'd fallen asleep, sitting upright, and woke up with dried blood under his nose. We were all falling apart. The next morning, we found a signal, a miracle. Kyle's GPS blinked to life, not fully no-map data, but enough to ping a signal from nearby. A ranger outpost, an actual one, less than 4 miles east. It shouldn't have been there, not based on any map we'd seen, but we didn't question it. We ran for hours. We tripped, we bled, we broke branches with our bodies, but we ran. And just as we thought we'd missed it, the trees broke open to reveal a weathered ranger tower rising out of the forest like a lighthouse from a black sea. We didn't knock. We didn't hesitate. The door was unlocked. Inside was a younger guy, mid-30s maybe, wearing the uniform and sipping coffee from a thermos. We looked up like we'd just walked in from the gas station, not dragged ourselves. From the edge of madness, when we explained, drushed, scattered, frantic, he raised his hand calmly and said, You're not the first." That was the moment I stopped feeling relief. Something in his tone was too flat, too rehearsed. He led us to a couch, brought us bottled water, offered us instant oatmeal. We ate without talking, without tasting. When we asked about the trailer, about the one we took, the one Kyle swore was marked decades ago, the ranger just looked out the window and said, "There's no trail out there. Not anymore. Not for a long, long time." We asked about Dan, gave a full description. He didn't even write it down, just nodded and said, "You should rest. We'll file a report in." The morning, but I knew he'd heard it all before. Too many times. We were just the next group in a long line of names they'd let disappear quietly. When I pressed him, demanded to know what was out there, he smiled sadly and said, "Some places don't want to be remembered. They don't want you to remember them either. You were airlifted out that afternoon." Kyle claimed he remembered nothing after the third day. Rachel said she dreamed of mirrors for weeks. I kept the pages I'd salvaged from the old ranger's cabin, even though they're fading more every day. Words disappearing, sketches blurring. The forest wants to be forgotten, but I can't. Not after what happened next. Because 2 days ago, someone left a voicemail on my burner phone. It's 3 seconds long. No caller ID, just static hand of voice, faint and distant, whispering my name. In my own voice, "It's been 6 months since we left the forest." I haven't spoken to Kyle or Rachel since the debrief at the ranger station. We tried for a while text threads, late night calls where we'd half laugh, half cry about what happened, but it didn't stick. Something in us cracked out there. Maybe it was Dan's disappearance. Maybe it was the things we saw and the things we know we didn't imagine. Or maybe it was the part we can't talk about. The feeling that we didn't leave alone. That whatever was in that forest is still peeling us apart, just slower now, more quietly, like rot under the surface. I sleep in the living room now. Haven't been able to set foot in my bedroom since I woke up to find pine needles in my sheets. No windows were open. But there they were, damp, clinging to the fabric, smelling exactly like the clearing where Dan vanished. I threw out the mattress that day, haven't replaced it. I sleep on the floor with a camping pad and a hatchet under my pillow, like that's going to protect me from something that can wear my voice like a second skin. I've stopped trying to explain this to people. Friends think I had a breakdown. My mom wants me to talk to someone, and I did once. But when the therapist said maybe it was all trauma and symbolism, I walked out. There's no metaphor for watching yourself step out from behind a tree, smile with your own face, and vanish into shadow. That's not a symbol, it's a warning. 3 weeks ago, I got the second voicemail. I never gave that number to anyone, just a burner I bought post-trip so I could feel clean again. The message was 5 seconds long, no static this time, just breathing. Then my own voice, half a whisper, getting closer. I played it 27 times before I smashed the phone. Drove 2 towns over to do it, tossed the SIM card into a drainage ditch, burned the battery in a campfire. I know how that sounds. I know how it looks, but it didn't stop. Last Tuesday, I found a note under my door, handwritten, my handwriting. But the paper smelled like moss, and the ink bled like rainwater. Just said, "You came back once, you'll come back again." I moved apartments after that. Didn't tell anyone where. It's paid cash. Disconnected from every account I had. But it's like that forest wrote itself into me. I see those trees in patterns now. Street cracks that branch like roots. Dust that settles in tight rings. I keep dreaming in loop, same path, same trees, same whispering. And always, always, a version of me ahead on the trail, just out of reach, beckoning with one hand. I don't know what happens if I catch up. I don't want to know. But some nights, I swear I wake up with mud on my feet. And once, I swear the shirt I wore that day in the woods, the orange flannel with the burn mark on the sleeve, was folded neatly on my couch. I buried it in a dumpster 2 states away. There's no reason it should be here. The worst part is the silence. Not just Rachel and Kyle who've gone quiet. The world itself feels ... thinner, like the noise of everyday life has dialed down. Street sounds muffled. Wind muted. Even my own voice sounds hollow when I speak aloud. I tested it once. I recorded myself reading a grocery list on my laptop, then played it back. The voice on the recording wasn't quite mine, just a shade off. The syllables stretched in ways I didn't remember saying. The pitch dipped lower at the end of every sentence, like it was getting tired, like it wasn't meant to last. I deleted it and closed the laptop, but sometimes I think I hear that voice reading things back to me when I'm alone, like it wants to remind me that I'm not finished, that we're not done. A week ago, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line, no body, just a video attachment labeled "Found You." I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew in the deepest part of me that this was the kind of thing you throw away without looking. But I opened it anyway. It was a short clip, maybe 10 seconds. Shot in the dark, blurry, handheld. It showed a forest trail just barely visible by moonlight. And standing on that trail was me. Not recently Mimi from that trip.
Same pack.
Same jacket. Same limp in my step from when I twisted my ankle on day 2. And then, in the last second, the camera panned upward. Just enough to show another version of me standing in the trees above, half-shadowed, grinning, then static, then black. I called Kyle, first time in months. It went straight to voicemail. The second time, I left a message. It just said, "It's happening again?" The next morning, I got a text from his number that just said, "Don't let it speak through you." That was it. Nothing else. I haven't heard from him since. I don't know if that was really Kyle who sent it. I don't know if it matters, because last night I started sleepwalking. First time in my life. Woke up on the apartment buildings. Rooftop, barefoot, clutching my old hiking knife with sap on the blade. I haven't left town in weeks. There's nothing green nearby. No pines, no trails. So where did that sap come from? Started seeing signs again. Literal signs. One nailed to a telephone pole outside my building. Embers Trailhead. 1.4 miles. Looked hand-painted. Red letters just like the fake trail marker we saw in the woods. I tore it down. Burned it. Didn't help. The next day there was one on my windshield. Same message, same lettering. I don't know who's leaving them or what's waiting at the end, but I think it's trying to call us all back, anyone who made it out. One by one, not quickly, slowly, with whispers, with dreams, with pieces of ourselves we thought were lost. I haven't told Rachel yet. I haven't tried. If she's still out there, I doubt she's the same. None of us are. That trail doesn't just lead you somewhere. It rewrites where you've already been, who you already were. I've been seeing myself in reflections lately. Not the normal kind mirrors are fine. It's windows that bother me now. At night, if I catch my reflection in the glass. Sometimes it's smiling before I do. Sometimes it doesn't blink when I do. Once it raised its hand like it wanted to knock right before I pulled the curtain shut. I haven't looked again since. I keep thinking back to that last day in the woods. The one where the ranger said, "Some places don't want to be remembered." But maybe that wasn't the full truth. Maybe some places want to be remembered by becoming part of you. Maybe that's the point. Not to kill, not to scare, to copy, to survive. Through us. There's one more thing. Last night, just before. I fell asleep on the floor. I heard footsteps in my kitchen. Slow, familiar. I stayed still, tried to convince myself it was nothing. But then I heard the sound of paper sliding under my door. I waited an hour before I had the nerve to open it. It was a single page, torn from my notebook. The top. In perfect handwriting, it said, "Last page." Beneath that, a single line, "Don't forget the way back in." That's when I realized whatever this is, it doesn't want to be escaped. It wants to be invited. It wants to be remembered. And worst of all, it wants a voice. I think it's getting ready to speak again. I just don't know if the next voice will be mine, or it's... If you're reading this, you probably already think people who chase ghosts are either thrill seekers or delusional. And honestly, most of them are. We weren't much different when we started. Our group was 5 friends, scattered across 3 states, who came together once a year to investigate haunted sites. But don't get the wrong idea. We weren't professionals. No YouTube channel, no documentaries, no fancy spirit boxes with blinking lights. Just field recorders, a couple of mid-range cameras, and too much free time. We called ourselves the Dead Channel Club. mostly as a joke. The whole thing started back in college, but it stuck. We were proud of our tradition. One weekend, every summer, we'd pick a remote place, set up camp, and listen for the dead. And every year, it was the same cold nights, weird animal noises, one or two creepy coincidences. And then we'd head home and laugh about how none of it was real. That was before this year. Before Camp Echo, we'd always stuck to known. Locations, abandoned hospitals, old cemeteries, places with legends we could Google. This time was different. Jeremy, the most serious of us, said he found a site that wasn't on any forums. Claimed he heard about it from a former park ranger he met on Reddit, of all places. I should have asked more questions then. We were all bored, restless, tired of the usual ghost stories. We wanted something raw, untapped, he said. Somewhere the air still held the stories. He sent us a GPS pin with nothing but the words, Echo Grove, trust me. I remember the exact moment I opened it. Out. There was no road leading in. Just a faded trail marker in the middle of an unnamed section of Oregon's national forest land. No campsites listed, no ranger posts nearby, just trees. I was the only one who hesitated. The others, Jeremy, Mel, Josh, and Caro, jumped at the chance. Let's make this the real one, Mel texted. Let's actually find something. Yeah, I almost backed out, but it was our 6th year and I didn't want to be the one who broke the streak. Besides, I've always believed that the scariest thing isn't seeing a ghost. It's thinking you're alone when you're not. That's why I handle the audio. For every trip, I'm the one with the headphones on, listening to hours of field recordings, picking through the static for things we missed in real time. And I've always loved it until this time, till the voices started talking back. We met at the trailhead in early August. The air was bone dry, thick with the kind of heat that makes the trees feel like they're pressing in. Everyone was in good spirits. Jeremy showed up with a printed map, which was strange because he usually mocked people who didn't rely on GPS. But he said the satellite coverage was weak this deep in the woods. That was our first red flag. We ignored it. I remember joking that we'd finally found the ghost of decent Wi-Fi. No one laughed. We were already sweating by the time we reached the first fork in the trail. The deeper we hiked, the more silent the forest got. No birds. No wind. Just the crunch of our boots and the occasional snap of a branch. It wasn't ominous yet, just ... heavy. Like the air was holding its breath. We reached the site by mid-afternoon. The trail opened into a shallow grove, half-cleared, ringed by tall pines, with an old fire pit built from blackened stones in the center. Jeremy swore it was used by fire lookouts in the 50s before the area was shut down. He said the stories from this place came mostly from missing persons reports campers who wandered off at night and were never found. But there were no local legends, no urban myths. It was quiet, forgotten, untouched. That's what made it perfect. We set up camp like we always did, 2 tents, gear stacked near the pit, mics and recorders prepped for sundown. Our rules were always the same. We'd split into pairs at dusk. One pair would walk the perimeter trail, recording EVP electronic voice phenomena while asking a series of agreed-upon questions. The others stayed near the fire with the static mics running. Every 10 minutes, we'd mark the time and speak a short phrase to serve as a time stamp. Echo 1, Echo 2, and so on. It was a system we'd refined over the years. It's designed to spot anomalies, anything that responded outside of those timestamps, or repeated when it shouldn't. And of course, we never responded to voices we didn't hear with our own ears in real time. That was rule number 1. If it's only in playback, don't engage. Jeremy and Kara took the first sweep. I stayed by the camp with Mel and Josh, monitoring the equipment. I still have the recording from that first hour. Everything sounds normal at first. Wind in the branches, the occasional creak of someone's boot on a root. Then, about 22 minutes in, you hear Jeremy say, Echo 3. Then Kara, copy. No movement, no signs. 10 seconds later, a third voice clear as day repeats the phrase, no signs. It sounds just like Kara, but Kara didn't say it again. I was there when we reviewed the clip later that night. I watched her face go pale as it played. I didn't say that, she whispered. I only said it once. Josh tried to reason it out, said maybe it was an echo or an accidental playback from someone's phone, but none of us were using phones. We'd packed them into a sealed bag they were turned off. Besides, field recorders don't echo. That night, we passed around the headphones and reviewed the whole session. More oddities. A laugh too faint to be human, but too clear to be wind. A whisper that answered one of Jeremy's questions before he even finished asking. Not just to sound a full sentence. You already know. It didn't scare us. Not yet. We thought it was the jackpot. Real responses. Real phenomena. We were finally recording something intelligent. Mel grinned and said, "Whatever's here, it knows we're listening. We should have left then." The moment you stop treating the voice as a thing and start thinking of it as someone you've already let it in. But we were high on adrenaline, on the possibility that we weren't wasting our time. So we kept going. We planned 3 more sessions for the following night. Same strategy, same rules. But something had already changed. The grove wasn't as quiet anymore. It wasn't birds or animals. It was something deeper, a hum in the air that didn't match any ambient sound we'd heard before, nor voices. They started showing up in places they shouldn't. The morning after our first sweep, Mel found a recorder she swore had been powered down. It was still running, and on it, a voice had said her name 5 times. Each time softer. Each time. Closer. She played it for us, laughing nervously, pretending it was weird but still cool. But I watched her hands. They were shaking. I asked her if she remembered anyone saying her name during the sweep. She shook her head, and then, as if she just remembered, added, not out loud, "That should have been the moment we called. It quits." That should have been the warning that something in Echo Grove didn't want to be recorded. It wanted to join the conversation. We decided to run 3 sessions the next night, rotating who stayed back and who went out with the gear. Mel and Josh went first, just after sundown. I watched them leave the perimeter of the grove with their handheld mics and backup recorder. Their silhouettes looked strange in the twilight tall shadows moving through a forest that had started to feel more like a set. Everything about Echo Grove felt staged, but not by us, like it had been waiting to host people again. We weren't the first. We just didn't know it yet. While they were out, I stayed near the campfire with Jeremy and Kara, though we didn't speak much. We monitored the primary recorder and kept an eye on the static mic that we'd embedded into the base of the old fire pit. It wasn't high-end equipment. It always picked up the clearest anomalies in previous years and explained blips, mechanical hisses. Once even what sounded like a low melody in a crumbling chapel. This time, though, it was different. 10 minutes. Into the session, the pit mic picked up breathing, not distant or wind-muffled, close, heavy, rhythmic. Then, just above it, a voice whispered, coming back. Jeremy flinched. I looked over at him, waiting for his usual smug grin, but it wasn't there. Did they just say something overcomes? He asked, reaching for the radio. Kara and I both shook our heads. We'd heard Mel's voice 2 minutes. Before calling the timestamp, Echo 2, this wasn't that. This wasn't even her voice. It was deeper, hungrier, and it didn't come through the cumsit. It came through the mic that was buried in the dirt. When Mel and Josh returned, they looked off. Not scared exactly, just quiet, dazed. They sat down slowly and took off their packs like their muscles didn't remember how. Any hits? I asked. Josh nodded, but didn't elaborate. Mel just said, voices were clearer, like they were practicing. She didn't explain what she meant by that, and we didn't push her. Jeremy checked the recorder 4 time stomps and frowned. He called Echo 3 twice, he said to Josh. First at 18 minutes, then again at 23. Josh blinked, confused. No, I didn't. We only called it once, but it was there. Played back, time-stamped, pitch-perfect duplicates. One followed the correct format. The other came just before it slightly distorted, but unmistakably Josh. And more than that, it responded to a question he hadn't asked yet. Any presence nearby? The real Josh never asked that question, but the voice on the tape did. 5 seconds before the real time stomp, the question was followed by silence, then another Josh voice. They already know. We listened to the clip 3 times, none of us saying much. Then Kara muttered what we were all thinking. It's not echoing us, it's guessing. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just repetition, it was mimicry with a purpose. Our voices were being used like training material. It was getting better. Jeremy leaned forward and, for the first time since this trip began, looked genuinely rattled. We break it up tomorrow, he said. No more pairs. No more perimeter. We stay together. We run one mic, all 5 of us. For a second, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it would help. Maybe we could drown it out with noise, force it to reveal itself. But looking back, that was the worst thing we could have done. Because whatever was out there didn't want isolation. It wanted a group. It wanted the full set. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my tent, headphones on, reviewing recordings. It's just low enough to not wake the others, just loud enough to hear things my brain wasn't ready for. Around 2:12 a.m. on the 3rd playback loop of our earlier session, I caught something buried between 2 sound gaps, just a breath and a single word. Listen. But the breath that followed wasn't human. It was thick, wet, pulled too slow. Like it had lungs that didn't understand how lungs were supposed to work. I yanked the headphones off and sat up in the dark, sweating. That's when I noticed my recorder was running, though I hadn't pressed record since the sweep. I hit stop and played it back, expecting nothing. But there was a voice, mine, saying something I'd never said. Don't wake them yet. It's not time. I checked the date stamp on the file 1 hour in the future. I should have been confused, but confusion didn't come. Just fear. A hard, cold kind of knowing. It was preparing something. Building. Echo Grove wasn't haunted. It was rehearsing. Like the whole forest was a stage and we were the actors it needed to get right. And now, it had enough of our voices. Our words, our inflections. It didn't need to wait anymore. It could start responding before we asked. It could build replies from fragments. If it could do that, if it could guess ahead, then what would stop it from pushing further? From taking over the part entirely? The morning, I told the others, played them the recording, showed them the time stomp. No one doubted me. It's how far we'd fallen. Nothing seemed too far-fetched anymore. Jeremy said we'd pack everything and start heading back by noon. But when he went to check the trail with Kara, they came back 20 minutes later, pale and silent. It's gone, Kara said. The trail, the fork we came from, it's not. There, at first, I thought she meant it was overgrown. It's obscured. But then she clarified, it's just not there. It's not even the same terrain. Jeremy nodded slowly, still processing. It's changed the layout, he said, half to himself, like it's moving the set pieces around. We radioed emergency services. Repeated the call 3 times on different frequencies. Nothing. We tried hiking out anyway, using the sun's position, guessing direction. But the deeper we walked, the more the forest began to resemble the inner ring of the grove. Same bent trees, same blackened stones. And once, I swear, we passed our own camp, again exact same setup, same arrangement, but it was empty. No firewood, just impressions in the soil where our tents had been. That was when Mel lost it. She dropped her pack and screamed into the trees, begged whatever was listening to stop. Then she went silent, just stopped moving. When we finally got her back to camp, she wouldn't speak. She hasn't spoken since. Not a word, just hums. Low, repeating patterns. Like playback loops, I spent that night watching the fire, listening to the wind, listening for my own voice. Because by then, I knew it would come. I just didn't know if it would still be mine. The next morning, we found a 6th sleeping bag zipped up beside the fire. Identical to ours.
Same brand, same forms.
Camo pattern. Same black drawstring. Hood pulled tight. But none of us had set it there. It was just there like it had always been. At first, we thought maybe we were losing track of our own gear, maybe. Someone had pulled it out and forgotten, but each of us accounted for our own setup. 5 bags, 5 tents, 5 packs, now 6 bags, no tent, no pack. Just a single sleeping bag zipped closed, resting where none of us had put it. Jeremy stood over it for a full minute before kneeling down and slowly unzipping the top. Like, he expected something inside, but it was empty. Or at least that's what we told ourselves. No one wanted to touch it again after that. Mel wouldn't even look at it. She'd stopped talking completely by then. Just watched the trees humming that same low loop under her breath, the rhythm matching the sound pattern from the earlier recording. I asked her gently if she remembered anything about the night before. She blinked once, then looked at me like I was the stranger, like I was the one out of place. She tilted her head and said, "You're using the wrong version of your voice," and then went quiet again. That same day, Kara noticed something wrong with our gear. Her water bottle was missing, not just misplaced, but replaced. Same brand, same color, but the dent she'd gotten from dropping it in the parking lot was gone. Her initials, which she'd etched in with a key years ago, not there. We checked everyone else's gear. Subtle differences began showing up everywhere. Josh's flashlight had the right model number, but the wrong scuff marks on the handle. Jeremy's laminated map had a trail mark that none of us remembered seeing before, cut straight through the grove. Like it had always been there. Even my headphones felt different. Same brand. Same wear on the ear pads. But the right side where I always hear a faint static hum from an old short was perfectly clear now, like the short had never existed. At some point, Kara said it aloud. "We're being swapped." No one replied, but we all felt it. Something out here was copying us, not just voices, not just words. It was copying objects, memory, details. One by one, piece by piece. Like it was replacing our reality with something just close enough to fool us until it didn't have to anymore.
Nice.
We started arguing after that. Not about the supernatural. Not even about what we were experiencing. It was more basic than that: logistics, food distribution, timing. Josh accused Jeremy of hoarding batteries. Kara snapped at me for not logging timestamps properly. Everyone was on edge, but it felt manufactured, like the tension was being pushed from somewhere else, as if the forest had decided we'd stopped entertaining it and was now setting us against each other. The static on our radios got worse. Voices started cutting in before we keyed our mics. Once I heard Josh's voice ask, "What happens when?" We all match, then silence. He swore he never said it, but the recording played it back, and it was him. Pitch perfect. Just like his voice had been reassembled from too many pieces. That afternoon, we decided to burn the extra sleeping bag. It seemed like the most direct way to send a message. We dragged it into the fire pit, poured the last of our alcohol stove fuel over it, and lit it up. It didn't burn right. Material curled too quickly, folded into itself like dry leaves. The smell wasn't plastic or synthetic, it was sweet, sickly sweet, like overripe fruit or meat left too long in the sun. Mel stood closest to the flames. She didn't flinch, didn't react, just tilted her head and whispered something too quiet to catch. When I asked what she said, she looked up at me and smiled only. It wasn't her smile. It was too wide, too symmetrical. A mirror of a smile. It's only one version, she said, then walked away. I checked the tape later that night. The voice didn't register. The mic picked up everyone else. Fire crackling. My questions. Even the breeze. But where she'd spoken, there was just silence. Not distortion. Silence. Like the mic didn't recognize her as sound anymore. That night, I was on watch. The others tried to sleep, if you can call it that. I sat near the last embers of our fire, headphones on, mic wired to a live feed so I could listen in real time. Most of it was static. A few rustles, maybe a raccoon circling the food packs. Around 3:06 a.m., I heard a new voice. It was my own, but I hadn't spoken. It said clearly, switching now. Then silence. I froze, looked around the camp. Everyone was asleep or pretending to be. I switched off the recorder and stood up slowly. Something in the air felt ... reversed. Like the space around us had folded in slightly, just enough to tilt the world sideways. I walked a slow perimeter, flashlight in hand, trying to find the edge of whatever was happening. I didn't find it. What I did find was a second camp. Ours. Same fire pit, same tent layout. Same logs stacked by the fire, only this one was empty. Fresh, untouched. Like a rehearsal space. A blank version waiting to be filled. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, then turned and ran. Didn't tell the others until morning. When I described it to them, they didn't even look surprised. Jeremy said, "It's preparing for something." Josh said, "It's already replaced one of us. We just don't know which." No one laughed. No one denied it. The idea had been with us for days, crawling under our skin. Mel still wasn't speaking in full sentences, just humming and repeating phrases under her breath. Phrases none of us had said yet. We kept finding more things replace gear, food packets, even our field notes. My own journal had 2 pages I didn't write. Same pen, same handwriting, different thoughts. Stuff I'd never admit out loud, stuff I wasn't sure anyone else knew. The kicker. They were written in past tense, describing things I hadn't done. But within 2 days, every single thing on that page came true, word for word. By then, none of us trusted each other. But worse, we didn't trust ourselves. I stopped listening to playback. Jeremy buried our backups in the woods. Kara threw her mic into the river and sat by the fire for 2 hours afterward, mumbling, "It's still in there, still in there." And the trail, still gone? Or maybe we were. Maybe the real trail was behind us, and we'd walked into a place that just kept reshaping itself around what we expected. Like it only existed as long as we believed in it. Like the moment we questioned it, it had to adapt. That's what haunted me the most. Not the voice recordings, not the swapped gear. The idea that the whole forest was responding to us, adjusting itself, getting closer, becoming us. The real shift came on the 5th night. By then, we'd stopped pretending everything was fine. The gear we used was inconsistent recorders that worked in the morning, were fried by sunset batteries, drained within minutes, and playback clips now contained words none of us remembered saying. Worse, some of the recordings began predicting our conversations. Not echoing, predicting. In one file, I asked Kara if she'd packed extra iodine tablets.
Oh.
The voice in the recording said no 3 seconds before I asked the question aloud, in real time. And she had said no. Same tone, same cadence. Only it answered first. At first, we thought it was latency, some kind of tech glitch, until Jeremy pointed out that time codes didn't match. The voice mine, Kara's anyone's was, responding early, as if it already knew. That's when we realized the threat wasn't just out there watching. It was learning, it was practicing, and it was now beginning to play ahead. That night, we sat around a dying fire, all 5 of us. Mel had finally stopped humming but hadn't spoken in nearly 24 hours. She just stared into the flames, like something was being transmitted through them. Kara had started clutching a rock in her fist, said she didn't trust her own hands anymore. She was afraid that if she dropped it, they'd move on their own. Josh didn't even argue when we suggested breaking camp. He was the one who used to laugh off ghost stories, mock every creek in the woods. Now he barely looked anyone in the eye, kept scratching behind his ear, like something was crawling inside. Jeremy tried to keep control, dividing up tasks, suggesting we mark trees and try to hike east again at dawn, but no one moved. We were stuck in more than one way. This wasn't just a physical place anymore. It was like Echo Grove had formed a membrane around us, sealing us in. This place was starting to talk in its own way. We had stopped running sweep sessions, but I kept the static mic live, tucked in the crook of a tree just outside the camp. It was meant to record ambient noise, but when I played it back just before sleep, something new came through. Not voices this time, footsteps. 5 sets matching. Hours in tempo and pattern. You can hear Mel shift her weight. Then Josh unzip his tent. Caught a cough softly. But after each sound, there's a second instance of the same action. Delayed by about 4 seconds. As if something in the woods was imitating each of us, just slightly behind, like it needed a buffer to keep the pattern. It didn't stop after a minute either. The recording goes on for over an hour, step for step, breath for breath, copying, following, waiting. I didn't tell the group. I couldn't, not yet. Because if something was tracking us that precisely, then maybe it wasn't just trying to learn how to sound like us. Maybe it was trying to become us. The next day brought proof we didn't want. Kara was the first to notice it, around mid-morning. She wandered to the edge of the grove, not far from where the fire pit had been set, and stopped dead in her tracks, slowly, her voice flat. We followed and found a second set of our boot prints, perfectly preserved in the dirt. Not from the day before, a wind-worn, fresh and possibly fresh, 5 sets. The exact route we'd taken the previous morning to search for the missing trail. Heel to toe, identical spacing. But we hadn't walked that way yet. We hadn't even packed up for the day. And there were no prints leading back. Just the route forward, like a preview or an invitation. "It knows what we'll do next," Josh whispered. And I could see it in his face. He believed it. We all did. Something was mapping our every movement down to the pressure of our steps. And if it could anticipate us, then maybe we weren't living this moment in real time anymore. Maybe it was already done, already recorded, already played. We tried to leave that afternoon, following our own prints like breadcrumbs. That might have been the worst idea yet. The further we followed them, the more it felt like we were stepping into our own shadows. The forest changed subtly again. Trees bent harder overhead. The ground sloped when it shouldn't. Mel stopped once and pointed at a nearby trunk. On it, carved deep into the bark, were the words, "You don't have to remember this." Below it was a crude sketch, 5 stick figures with slashed mouths. I took a picture. Later, when I checked my phone, the image file was corrupted. Every other photo worked, just that one was gone. Not blurry, erased. By early evening, we were back at the same clearing. Same stones, same fire pit, like the trail had folded in on itself. Kara finally broke. She started tearing her tent apart, screaming that her sleeping bag was different again. Shorter this time, not hers. She swore it was one size too small, that the zipper had been replaced with a different brand. Jeremy tried to calm her down, but she wasn't hearing us. She just kept shouting, "It's resizing me. It's measuring me." It took both Josh and me to pin her arms and wrap her in a blanket. She cried herself to sleep that night, whispering, "It's trying on our shapes. It doesn't know which ones fit." Jeremy sat beside me as we took turns keeping watch. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "I think there's more than one," he said. Asked what he meant. He hesitated, then said, "I think it's making versions of us, in different stages, testing which ones stick." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because deep down, I already knew he was right. We'd all seen versions of each other in flashes moments, where someone moved before they should have, responded to a question we hadn't asked. Mel once repeated a line Josh was about to say, word for word, before he opened his mouth. Kara had once blinked out of sync with her own voice. And me. I'd caught my reflection in a puddle 2 days earlier. Only the reflection smiled first. That night, something new happened. I woke up to find Mel sitting by the fire. I didn't think much of it. She'd been up a lot lately, restless. But when I spoke her name, she didn't turn. I approached slowly, flashlight off, the firelight. Cast long shadows across her back. "You okay?" I asked. No answer. I circled around and froze. Her face was blank, not expressionless blank. No features. Just smooth, taut skin where her eyes, mouth, and nose should have been. Like someone had started forming her, then given up. I stumbled backward, tripping. Over a root, heart slamming. When I looked up again, she was gone. The log was empty. When I burst into her tent, she was asleep inside, breathing normally. I shook her awake. Her face was fine. Her voice, when she mumbled a sleepy protest, was normal. But I didn't sleep again. Not that night. Maybe not since. Because now I knew. The thing in Echo Grove wasn't just copying us. It was printing. Drafts. Testing templates. Scrapping what didn't work. And somewhere in those woods, the rejected versions were still walking. Still breathing. Still watching. We didn't agree to leave. We ran. There was no plan, no final vote, no packing up carefully like we had done the day before. It was panic, raw, and unfiltered. It started right after I found Kara standing in the middle of the fire pit. No shoes. No pack. No memory of how she got there. She was shaking, staring into the woods like something was calling her. When I tried to pull her back, she turned to me slowly and whispered, "It's not finished copying you yet." Then she blinked just once, suddenly seemed aware of where she was again. She looked at her feet, confused, then at me, and started crying. That was it. That was the moment. Jeremy shouted that we needed to go, that we were giving it what it wanted by staying. I nodded, grabbed what I could carry, and we ran.
Just
Bolted into the trees, directionless, furious with fear. We didn't care about east or west anymore, just away. Anywhere but Echo Grove, the woods changed fast once we moved. The trees, which had once seemed tangled and ancient, now looked newer, wrong somehow. Like someone had replaced them quickly, sloppily, copying the shape of a forest without understanding how it really worked. Pines grew too close together, limbs intersecting at angles that didn't make sense. We crashed through branches that should have snapped but didn't, bounced off trunks that seemed to flex instead of give way. At one point, Mel screamed one short, horrible sound, and we turned to see her staring at a clearing filled with tent frames. Not ours. Not real. Tents, just outlines made of sticks, twine, and animal hide. But each one matched our gear setup, same layout, same spacing. And from the middle tent, a voice called out, "You left your voice behind." It was Mel's voice, said it 3 times before fading into silence. She didn't scream again. She just turned around and ran faster. We stopped only when Josh collapsed. He hit the ground hard, gasping, his right leg twisted beneath him. At first I thought he'd stepped in a hole. But then I saw the root thick and dark, coiled around his ankle like it had reached for him. Kara and I tried to pry it off, but it didn't move like a normal root. It throbbed, pulsing gently. With each of Josh's panicked breaths, "Cut it," he screamed. "Cut it off." Jeremy slashed it with his knife, and it peeled back lean, almost surgical, like it had never been part of the ground at all. Josh pulled free, and we helped him limp away, but the pace was slower now, and we weren't alone anymore. We could hear them behind us. Footsteps, voices, our own. They didn't call out, they didn't scream or cry, they just spoke softly, steadily, the way we did during our first EVP sessions. "Echo 1, one voice said, sounding just like Jeremy. Then, a beat later, Echo 2, from a voice that matched mine exactly. I glanced back once and caught sight of shadows moving between the trees tall. Lean figures wearing outlines of our clothes, but the details were off. No zippers, no creases. Like clothing remembered from a photo, one of them limped. Another moved too smoothly, like a puppet on a rail. But they kept pace with us. Didn't need to sprint, just waited for us to tire. Waited for us to make a mistake. We reached a ridge by late afternoon. From the top, we could see a break in the Trezan old logging road, be 50 yards below, barely visible beneath fallen limbs and dry leaves. We didn't care what it was a path. The first one we'd seen that wasn't laid out, by something copying us. Kara helped Josh limp down the slope, while Jeremy and I cleared the way. Mel stayed behind for a second, turning to face the woods, head tilted again like she was listening. I called her name. She didn't move. "I reached her," she whispered. "They're almost done." I grabbed her arm, pulled her away, and we didn't look back. Not until we hit the road. Once we were on it, everything changed again. The air was heavier, almost humid. The wind picked up for the first time in days, bending the trees back as if trying to push us forward. There were no voices anymore. No copies, just the sound of our own breath, ragged and sharp. It took us nearly an hour to follow the road to a fork where a wooden signpost leaned sideways. The names had faded off long ago, but someone had carved a single phrase into the wood. "If you leave, you stay." We didn't stop. We didn't even try to guess what it meant. Just kept moving, knowing something was still following. Eventually, we reached a ranger station. It's not the one Jeremy had marked on his map, but a real one stocked, and lit by solar panels. A woman in uniform stepped out, wide-eyed, asking if we were injured. Tried to explain, but everything came out in broken pieces. She took us inside, offered us water and first aid, and said we weren't the first. I've had 3 other groups come through this year, she said, voice low. Different directions, different stories, same place, same loss. When we asked what she meant by loss, she just looked at the wall where several photos were pinned missing persons. Trail closures, unexplained incidents. I recognized one face. I couldn't place it at first, and it hit me. The man in the photo had my face, younger maybe by 10 years, but unmistakable. The name beneath it wasn't mine, but I knew the face. It was one of the shadows. One of the things in the forest, and it had come before me. We left the next morning by truck, escorted down the mountain by the ranger. She didn't speak much during the ride, just kept glancing at us in the rearview mirror, as if she expected one of us to disappear mid-sentence. When we reached the ranger office at the base of the range, she handed us a single sheet of paper, a waiver, unsigned, stating we had not seen anything that required follow-up. We didn't argue. We signed it, not because we believed in keeping secrets, but because we knew it didn't matter. Echo Grove doesn't care if you talk, it only cares if you listen. We went our separate ways after that. No final dinner, no regrouping online, just quiet departures. I haven't heard from Mel since. Kara texts me once a month, usually at 3:13 a.m. Her messages are always the same, still clear. I don't respond. I haven't had the nerve. Josh left the group chat permanently. Jeremy went dark. Deleted all our old recordings from the shared drive, then wiped the email thread entirely. I guess he thought that would stop it. Need wires or files? They live in rhythm, in patterns. And once you've been heard by something like that, it doesn't forget the shape of your voice. It's been 9 months since Echo Grove. I still can't say the name out loud without flinching. I live alone now, in a basement apartment, 2 towns away from where I used to work. I cut ties with everyone except Kara, and even that's limited to cryptic texts. I told myself I moved because I needed a fresh start, needed to feel like the ground wasn't shifting under my feet. But the truth is simpler. I moved because I kept hearing voices in the pipes, not just sounds voices. Mine, mostly. Sometimes Kara's, once unmistakably Jeremy's. Though I never told anyone, they never said anything threatening, just familiar things, little phrases we'd used around camp. You left your voice behind, Echo One. It's learning. You always at odd hours, always to clear. At first I tried to record them to prove it was real, but nothing ever came through on playback. Nothing ever showed up, just silence, just like back in the Grove. For a while I convinced myself it was trauma, auditory memory. That's what the therapist said during our 3rd and final session. The brain repeats patterns when it doesn't know how to file an experience. She wanted me to write it all down, to get it out. I tried. That's what this is supposed to be. But writing it doesn't help. If anything, it makes the details sharper. It brings back the way Kara looked that morning after the Grove, standing in my doorway with a coffee, hands shaking as she whispered, I can't remember my real laugh anymore. Or how Josh left me a voicemail 2 months after we escaped. Just 30 seconds of ambient noise, then quietly his own voice. One of us never left. That was the last I heard from him. His number disconnected a week later. I don't know. If he meant himself for someone else? Sometimes I wonder if Mel ever came back at all. We saw her at the ranger station. We heard her speak. But if I'm honest, there's a memory I can't shake. That last night in the Grove when I found her by the fire, blank-faced, unmoving. No features, no breath. It was only a moment, and it changed when I blinked. But the more time passes, the more that version feels like the truth. Like she never made it back down the ridge with us. Like the version that did was the most successful. Copy, and maybe that's the point. Not that it replaces you to harm you, but that it replaces you because it can. Because the forest doesn't forget what works. It just reuses it. I still have one of the recorders. I tried to get rid of it. Twice. First, I threw it into a river that cuts through the edge of town. A week later, it was sitting on my kitchen table. No damage. No rust. Just resting there beside my coffee mug, like it had always belonged. Second time, I smashed it with a hammer, watched it crack in half, wiring exposed. 2 nights later, I found it fully intact, zipped into my jacket pocket. The same jacket I haven't worn since the trip. I don't use it anymore. I keep it locked in a drawer, inside a bag filled with salt. I'm not even religious. I just want to feel like I've done something to slow it down, something to make it harder for whatever Echo Grove is to find me again, but it hasn't really stopped. The voice recordings are subtler now, embedded in places I shouldn't hear them, radio static between channels. Electric hums in the fridge, the hollow ring when I let the faucet run too. Long my voice, always mine. Not words anymore, just intonation, as if something is still adjusting to the way I speak, still editing. And once God helped me once, I heard it hum the same low, looping tune Mel used to sing at camp. That strange, tuneless hum. I heard it behind my apartment wall, as if someone was standing on the other side. I didn't sleep that night. I just stood in the center of the room holding a flashlight and my old field knife, waiting for something to start speaking clearly again. Every now and then, I get messages from Kara. Never more than 5 words. Still clear, don't speak its name, no changes yet. But last week the message was different. This time it just said, left ear only now. That's it, no context, no follow-up. I haven't replied. I don't think I want to know what she meant. Maybe she hears it too now, but only in one ear. Maybe that's how it starts. Partial mimicry, partial occupation. And slowly over time, it completes. The rest, layer by layer, replacing what it can, discarding what it can't. I've stopped trusting stereo audio. All my devices now run on mono. I only play music from one speaker. I don't want to hear 2 of anything. I don't want to hear myself in stereo. Yesterday, I received a package. No return address, no postage, just sitting outside my door, wrapped in brown paper and twine. I shouldn't have opened it. I should have burned it on the spot, but I did. Inside was a cassette tape, unlabeled, in a single piece of paper. No message, no threats. Just one phrase, printed in typewriter font. Let it speak. I don't own a cassette player anymore. Haven't since college. But I bought one from a pawn shop this morning. I haven't played the tape yet. It's sitting on my kitchen table right now. I keep looking at it, thinking if I just leave it long enough, maybe it'll disappear. Maybe someone will take it back, but it hasn't moved. I keep thinking about that line. Let it speak. Maybe it already has. Maybe it doesn't need permission. Maybe it's just waiting for the right moment to finish the sentence it started 9 months ago. Every night I dream of the grove, not just trees and tense copies. I see myself walking through the forest again, following footsteps that match my stride exactly. In the dream, I never catch up. I always wake up just before I reach the figure. But last night, last night was different. I reached out, touched the shoulder. The copy turned around and smiled. When it opened its mouth, it didn't speak. It played back a sound. The static hum from our original campfire session, the first one, from before we knew. From when we still believed we were alone, that's when I knew. We were never alone. Not then, not now. Something was always listening. And once it had our voices, it never needed us to talk again. Just to listen, just to obey, just to echo. I played the tape this morning. I thought I wouldn't, I told myself. I wouldn't. I left it on the kitchen table for 4 days, untouched, while I tried to convince myself that it was just someone's twisted joke. Maybe Kara, maybe some stranger who'd read one of our old message board posts. But at 3:17 a.m., after waking up to the sound of my own voice whispering a single word, now I put the tape into the old player and pressed play. No warm-up, no hiss, just sound. And not the kind of sound I expected. It started with silence. Not white noise total void. Someone had recorded absence itself. Then a soft pop, followed by something worse. My voice, but not speaking, just breathing. Then the sound of footsteps, my own, unmistakably. Then layered beneath that, the voice of Kara, then Jeremy, then Mel, then Josh. All of us breathing, walking. All of us layered together, like someone had recorded every second of that first night and stacked it into a single, unholy track. At the 12-minute mark, something spoke. It wasn't any of us, but it sounded like all of us, words constructed. From syllables we had used, it doesn't need permission. Then a pause. We are the practice run. I hit stop, ejected the tape, but the player kept spinning. I unplugged it, kept humming. I had to take a hammer to the thing, smash it into pieces, tear the tape from the reels with shaking hands. Even then, the sound kept playing, not out loud. In my head, like it had crawled into the space behind my ears and settled there. I can still hear it as I write this just under the silence. Like a new layer of static built into my brain. I haven't slept since. Not really. Just short bursts of unconsciousness broken by flashes, branches scraping windows that aren't there. Ash drifting from fires that were never lit. Once, I woke. Up to find I'd written something in my own notebook, a page I don't remember opening. The handwriting was mine. The words weren't. The first voice isn't yours. The last one is. Tore it out, burned it, flushed the ashes. But the indentation is still there on the next page. Like it wants to be remembered, even if I try to forget it. 2 days ago, a friend from college I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me out of the blue. He said he found a folder of our old Ghost Hunt audio on a backup drive. One labeled, Echo Grove 1. I never named a file that. I never shared the audio. He wanted to know why there were 2 of each voice on the recordings. Did we double track it? He asked. Why do some of the questions come before the answers? I didn't reply. I just told him to delete the whole thing. He said he would. But yesterday he emailed again. No subject. No message. Just Anne. Audio clip attached. It was 3 seconds long. Voice saying my name. But it wasn't mine. It was mine. With the emotion drained out like it had been rehearsed so many times it had lost meaning. I didn't listen to it a second time. I couldn't. Kara stopped texting. Her last message came at 2:46 a.m. a few nights back. It read, "The real ones don't leave messages. Tried to call. The line was dead." I haven't heard anything. Since I don't know if she's still herself, I don't know if any of us are. Sometimes I wonder if the people who made it out of Echo Grove were already copies better, smoother, more compliant versions. Sometimes I think we never left at all. And maybe we're still somewhere in those woods, walking the same loop, calling out our own names, and waiting for someone to answer. There's something else. Something I didn't want to admit until now. I've started recording myself again. Not intentionally. I'll wake up and find a recorder running on the nightstand, or my phone voice memos app open with a new file. Stamped at a time I was asleep. The content is always the same. Silence for a few seconds. Then, me, saying something I haven't said yet, but eventually do, days or hours later. The words are always mundane, harmless, need to buy eggs. Rain's coming tomorrow, but each time it happens I can feel it getting closer to something bigger. Like the voice is slowly working its way toward the one sentence that changes everything. I don't know what that sentence is yet. I don't want to know. I've started writing messages on my mirrors in dry erase marker. Not for paranoia. For accountability, still me. Left-handed today. No double reflection. Stupid little rituals to remind myself I'm still the original. That the one walking around in my skin is the same person who hiked into that forest. But I'm not sure they help. Not anymore. Because last night, I looked in the mirror and saw my mouth move a half second before I spoke. Not a glitch, not a dream, just a sign that something out there is still synced to me, still listening, still testing. If you're reading this, it means something has reached you. It's maybe through audio, maybe through a dream, maybe through a piece of gear you thought you'd left behind. That's how it starts. You think it's just memory, a glitch, echoes. But echoes don't predict. Echoes don't become you. This will be the last thing I write before I go completely dark. More devices, no more recordings. I'm moving again. It's far from power. It's far from signal. I have 2. Because I think it's trying to make the final version of me. It's the one that sticks. The one that answers back on time. If someone finds this, do not go to Echo Grove. Do not answer a voice you think is your own. Do not speak when you hear. Yourself calling? Just walk away. Let silence win. Let the static settle. Don't let it speak. Because once it speaks with your voice, that's all you'll ever be. An echo. We didn't choose the forest because it was beautiful, chose it because it was cheap. That's how these things start, not with wonder, but with worry. Money had been tight for months after the wedding, so the honeymoon fund we'd saved up got drained fast by things we hadn't planned for. Mold in the apartment, blown transmission, medical bills that somehow got more expensive after insurance helped. It was getting harder to pretend we were okay. Even our friends started avoiding certain questions. So when we stumbled across a small listing, buried on a wilderness blog advertising a secluded, backpacking honeymoon through a restoration area of National Forest, for a deeply discounted price, we didn't think twice. The site said it was part of an independent ecotourism program. It was invitingly and lightly restricted due to ongoing regeneration studies. It sounded legitimate, exclusive even. It's a perfect way to feel like we were doing something meaningful instead of just broke. I still remember how thrilled Mia was when we got the confirmation email. She forwarded it to me with 3 exclamation points and a caption that just read, "We're finally getting out of here." I didn't have the heart to say I had doubts. I didn't want to take that from her. We needed a win, something we could say we'd done right. The trip promised 6 days of guided backpacking through unmarked trails, nights spent under stars, untouched by light pollution, and a chance to help document rare flora for scientific records. All we had to do was follow instructions, stay on the mapped route, and not disturb flagged zones marked with red twine. I was skeptical, sure, but I figured even if it was just a rebranded tour company trying to seem edgy, at least we'd be in nature, away from stress, away from screens. Ain't we both needed the distance? There were only 2 requirements. We had to use our own gear, and we had to sign an NDA. That should have been a red flag. But against Coop, weird times, and people will convince themselves of anything when they're tired enough. The agreement was long, too long for what it was. But the gist was this. We weren't to share GPS coordinates, post photos during the trip, or disclose the name of the trail system, which the company called an evolving ecological corridor. It sounded fancy, scientific. We signed without reading the fine print. Who really does? They emailed us a drop location, a gravel turnout near the edge of an unincorporated county in Oregon. A laminated trail map and a radio would be waiting for us, along with a waterproof binder containing our briefing materials. No cell reception was expected. We were to check in every 12 hours by voice, using the provided call sign. No other radio communication allowed. I remember laughing at how intense it sounded. Mia called it nerdy as hell. We should have asked more questions. We left on a Thursday, our packs loaded and our expectations low. It was mid-September, and the weather couldn't have been more perfect. Cool breeze, sun filtered through 1,000 shades of green, the road curving around tall stretches of Douglas fir and red cedar. It felt surreal, like we'd slipped into a postcard. Even the trailhead was charming in its way, a small wooden box nailed to a tree, with our names written in thick Sharpie on a plastic envelope. Inside was the binder of the radio, a map wrapped in wax paper, 2 thin wristbands labeled EC003A and EC003B. I slipped mine on without thinking. The band was snug. It's almost too snug. Mia had to help adjust the clasp. The moment it clicked shut, the radio squawked with static, and a distorted voice crackled through. Welcome, participants. Trail calibration. Successful. We both jumped, then laughed. It felt like some kind of scavenger hunt. More immersive than we expected. Harmless. Exciting. The map was hand-drawn, sketched in faded ink that looked decades old. No roads, no names, just topography. Hand-marked trail segments, water sources. in a looping path through a wide green-shaded area labeled only as Zone 3. At the top of the map was a note, "Trail reshapes after rainfall. Trust the land." We both commented on how poetic it sounded. We assumed it was just branding hippie jargon meant to romanticize the hike. And for the first day, everything really did feel magical. We followed the trail easily. It was narrow, but distinct, winding between dense clusters of fern and vine maple. Here and there, we saw little colored tags hanging from branches, blue and yellow mostly. We didn't know what they meant, but they added a kind of mystique, like we were part of something secret and old. By the time we reached our first campsite, we were glowing. We set up our tent beside a stream so clear it looked artificial. The water moved slow, shallow, with polished stones underneath that. Seemed arranged more than random. We ate peanut noodles from a bag, listened to the chirp of tree frogs, and tried the radio check-in. Around 8 p.m., we spoke the phrase we'd been given. ECO03 status green, camp set. The reply came immediately, no delay, no sign of another person's voice, just a mechanical tone, and the word confirmed. We tried again. Mia and David checking in camp secure. The same response, same tone, confirmed. No human reply, no chatter, just that robotic certainty. We joked that maybe the whole program was being run by a bot in a trailer somewhere, or worse, a high school intern with a pre-recorded tape deck. We laughed it off. What else could we do? That night, the wind picked up and carried the scent of pine, dry leaves, and something sweeter like honeysuckle or decaying fruit. I woke up twice to check for animals, but found nothing. Just the dark, endless press of the woods. We slept. Soundly, or at least pretended to. In the morning, she told me she dreamed of a weeping woman standing just outside the tent, her eyes covered in vines. I laughed it off, tried to make it sound romantic, like a woodland spirit. I said, but the way Mia described her, it didn't sound romantic. It sounded hungry. Still, we moved forward. The trail felt tighter the second day, the plants growing closer together. Some branches looked freshly broken, like something had pushed. Through the trail before us, and the trees, they leaned inward, slightly. Just enough to make you feel watched, even when you knew you were alone. We chalked it up to trail neglect. No one maintained these areas regularly, after all. That's what the trip was for, restoration, remember? By evening, we'd reached a grove marked with the first red twine we'd seen. It was looped around a circle of birch trees, twisted tight, low to the ground like a warning. We didn't. Stepped past it, noted it on the map, and made camp a good 50 feet away. That night, Mia didn't dream, or at least she said she didn't, but I woke up with soil on my hands. Thick, dark earth under my fingernails. I don't sleepwalk, never have. I rinsed them in the stream and told myself I'd scratch myself while sleeping, but I didn't see any cuts. I didn't see any scrapes, just dirt packed under the nails like I'd been digging. The third morning started bright and too quiet. There were birds, sure chirps, here and there, but they felt like they were keeping their distance. I noticed it as soon as I stepped out of the tent. The air had that heavy, padded stillness you only feel after a storm, except there hadn't been any rain, just silence and that smell against something earthy, sweet, and overripe, like fruit left out too long in the sun. Mia was already kneeling at the edge of the stream, brushing her teeth. When I asked her how she slept, she said she didn't remember, which was a shift. Normally, she could recount her dreams in full detail, every strange twist and color. Time? Nothing. Just a shrug, and I woke up sore, though, like I ran all night. Her neck had a faint red line across it, thin and jagged, like something small had brushed or pressed against her in the dark. She hadn't noticed it. When I pointed it out, she said maybe it was from her jacket collar. I didn't press, but I didn't believe it. We checked the trail map after breakfast. Our next segment curved through what the binder called the healing corridor, a term I found cheesy at first, till I realized there wasn't a straight line anywhere on the page. The route curled in on itself, through clusters of trees marked with odd notations we hadn't seen before. Circular symbols with dots inside them, and one section just labeled, "Do not enter." That part wasn't near us, at least not yet. Still, the map had changed. Subtly, yes, but it had changed. The angles were different. The stream's line had shifted east by half an inch. I held it side by side with the photo Mia had taken on day one, and it was clear as day. Some landmarks, had Mudor, were drawn differently now. I told myself it was just hand-drawn but a deep, crawling unease settled in. We'd measured distances based on that map. If it wasn't accurate, we had a problem. That day's hike was longer and harder. The trail narrowed sharply, often forcing us to move single file or duck. Beneath low branches slick with dew, the ground had turned soft, in spots not muddy, just loose, like something had churned the soil recently. I kept looking for boot prints, signs of other hikers, but there were none. Strange, half-formed indentations that looked like claws or roots had pressed down, then pulled away. Mia stopped once to photograph a tree with what looked like carvings spiraling upward from the base-tiny geometric patterns etched into the bark, too symmetrical to be natural. When I touched one, it was warm. I don't know why that unsettled me more than anything else. Trees aren't supposed to feel warm, not like that. Not when the sun's barely made it through the canopy. By mid-afternoon, the trees began changing. It's not just species structure. They grew taller, thinner, their trunks weaving around each other in near impossible braids. The branches curved downward like claws, forming archways over the path. And the forest floor grew spongy with moss that swallowed the sound of our footsteps. We stopped talking around that point. Not out of fear, exactly, but out of instinct. The place demanded silence. Even Mia, who never turned down a chance to chat, had gone still. She kept brushing her fingers along the tree trunks as we passed, eyes glazed, her mouth slightly open like she was trying to catch a tune she couldn't quite hear. When I asked if she was okay, she looked at me too slowly and said, "It's just nice not to be thinking for once." That scared me more than anything we'd seen. When we made camp that night, the clearing felt off. It's even. No fallen branches, no overgrowth, like it had been swept clean. The binder didn't mention anything special about the site, but it was marked with a blue square, which we decided meant safe zone. We didn't feel safe. There were no sounds, no frogs, no birds, not even the wind. The trees stood perfectly still around us, trunks facing inward slightly, like they'd grown to observe whoever stopped there. Mia was the one who noticed it first. "They're curved," she said, pointing at the trees closest to our tent. "They weren't like that when we got here." She wasn't wrong. The lean wasn't dramatic, but it wasn't natural either. Trees don't bow inward in a perfect circle. We cooked over a portable stove, ate in silence, and tried to use the radio. This time, there was a delasic seconds between our check-in and the response. Still the same word, confirmed. But the tone was lower now, a little warped, as if someone had dragged their finger across the tape. Mia didn't comment. She just stared at the forest. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I stopped moving. At first there was nothing. Then, barely audible like a hum pressed deep into the moss, a whisper, not words, it's just the shape of them. Like the forest was murmuring beneath itself, a language spoken from root to root. We stayed up until the stove's light died out, and even then, we didn't go inside the tent for a long time. At night I dreamed of vines. I was buried beneath them, eyes open, mouth full of soil. Something above me moved in the branches, pulling the vines tighter, knotting them around my throat, humming the same tune Mia used to sing when we'd walk home from the train station back in Portland. When I woke up, my wristband was missing. I didn't panic right away. I assumed it had slipped off during the night. But after 30 minutes of searching, it wasn't in the tent, not in the bags, not outside. It was gone. We searched again. Nothing. Mia didn't say anything, but I could feel her watching me differently, like she was trying to decide if I'd lost something important or thrown it away. That was the first time I saw doubt in her eyes. I wasn't sure I was still on the same page. I guess she wasn't sure I was still ... me. By the fourth day, we'd started to argue over stupid things. How much water to carry? Which side of the trail had the better footing? Whether we were still on the mapped route or had wandered off course without realizing it, the tension didn't burst, it bled, slow and quiet, like something seeping through the cracks. I don't think either of us wanted to fight, but the silence of the forest made every word too loud. Every sigh felt like a challenge. There was no privacy even between us. It was like the trees heard everything and fed it back in subtle ways. Misplaced item, a flicker of movement in the corner of your eye. A whisper that echoed your own thoughts, but in someone else's tone. That morning, Mia asked if I was still glad we came. I tried to joke, said it beat our apartment and the screaming neighbors, but she didn't smile. She just said, "Sometimes I think it brought us here on purpose," and kept walking. Trail grew more uneven, the path curling in ways that made no sense topographically. We'd walk uphill only to arrive at the same stream we'd crossed an hour earlier, but from the opposite side. Trees we marked with bits of ribbon would disappear, or appear again where they shouldn't. At one point, Mia pulled out her phone. Even though we both knew there was no signal, she opened the compass app, stared at it, then showed me the screen. The needle spun in slow, lazy circles. We laughed a little. What else could we do? But it wasn't funny. Not really. Around. Midday, we found another red twine zone. This one wasn't a circle. It was a long corridor of trees, the twine strung from trunk to trunk about waist height, weaving a crude barrier that stretched out of sight in both directions. In the center stood a totem, not a statue, not art. It looked like it had grown. That way, a tangled mass of bark and bone and what might have been old rope or hair, twisted into a humanoid shape with no face. It didn't feel spiritual. It felt angry, not overtly, more like a grudge that had sunk so deep into the wood that it was now part of the grain. Mia stood staring at it for a long time, her head tilted slightly like she was listening. I had to touch her shoulder to get her to move. She blinked, frowned, and said I didn't mean to stop. But she'd been standing there for at least 5 minutes. That night, the forest felt too close. Trees that had been 10 feet away were now 5. Roots crept under the tent floor, curling just beneath the surface, like veins rising under. Skin. When we walked a few yards away to use the bathroom, always in pairs now, we found that our footprints from earlier had already been erased. Not by rain or wind, but by new growth. Ferns where there had been none. Moss that wasn't there an hour before. I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe this part of the forest really was regenerating faster than usual, or we were just tired. In seeing things. But the truth sat there in my gut, heavy and quiet. We weren't imagining it. The forest was moving, shaping itself around us. That night, the whispering returned. It wasn't subtle this time. It came from all directions. Low and rhythmic, like breathing. No words we could make out. But the cadence was unmistakable. It was talking to itself, or to something else. We lay in the tent, pressed close, holding hands without acknowledging it. Neither of us slept. Just before dawn, the radio came to life on its own. No check-in, no call, just that same warped tone. EC003 are removed. Adjusting conditions. We didn't understand what it meant until I looked at Mia's wrist. Her band was gone, just like mine had been. We both stared at each other, not speaking. The radio went silent again. We didn't turn it back on. The morning after, Mia asked me something that still makes my skin crawl. She said, if we don't make it back, how do we know we didn't get replaced? It didn't sound like a joke, and it wasn't followed by laughter or a smirk. She meant it, and I couldn't answer, because I'd already wondered the same thing more than once. Things felt off inside. Mean small things. My handwriting didn't look quite the same when I scribbled in my notebook. My thoughts felt out of order, like someone had shuffled a deck and handed me back most but not all of the cards. When I looked at Mia, I saw it in her too. Not fear, not panic, doubt. Like we weren't just afraid of what was out there. We were starting to question what was in here, in each other, in ourselves. We stayed an extra day in that same clearing, not because we wanted to, but because the trail disappeared, literally. When we packed up and stepped outside the tent, the path we'd followed into camp was gone. Not overgrown or blocked, just absent. In its place were dense ferns and young saplings, no taller than my waist, their leaves still soft and pale, like they'd just sprouted. It was like the forest had decided to seal us in overnight. We walked, in a slow spiral for almost 2 hours, trying to find the exit, checking the map over and over again, but the markers no longer matched the land. The trees had moved. With them, our sense of direction unraveled. Mia started marking them with charcoal symbols, triangles, crosses, numbers, but each time we came back to one. The mark was gone or stretched thin like it had been pulled into the bark itself. She was trying to stay rational, but I could see her unraveling behind her eyes. I felt it in myself too, like the air was thicker now, harder to pull in, like the trees were breathing and we were just in their lungs. Later that afternoon, we found something wrapped in vines behind a cluster of twisted cedar trunks. It was hanging about 4 feet off the ground, partially hidden. At first, we thought it was a branch, or maybe an old piece of gear. But I got closer. I saw the shape of a face not real, but carved. It was a crude wooden mask, bound with braided roots that had grown through its eye holes and mouth. The vines held it up like it was a trophy or maybe a warning. We didn't touch it. We didn't speak. We just kept walking, even though we didn't know where we were walking to. Something about the air had changed after we saw it, a scent like iron and wet moss. The pressure in the ears like descending in an airplane. It didn't let up for the rest of the day. That night, Mia had the dream again. The weeping woman in vines, only this time, she didn't see her from a distance. She was inside the dream. Beneath the same canopy of trees, her feet bare on cold soil, and the woman, if that's what it was, stood only a few feet away, face obscured by tangled roots, arms outstretched, fingers long and wrapped in bark. Mia said the woman whispered something, but it wasn't in any language she knew, just breath and sorrow, sound more than a word. And then the vines began to crawl toward her feet, slowly at first, then all at once. She woke up screaming. When I turned on the headlamp, her ankles were covered in faint red lines, not scratches, not bites, imprints, as if something had wrapped tightly around them and let go just before we woke. That was the first time we seriously talked about leaving, no maps, no plan, just heading east and keeping the sun on our left. But the fear that we were already too far gone, already off the grid, sat between us like a third presence. In the morning, I found our cookware arranged in a perfect spiral beside the tent. We hadn't unpacked it since dinner. Hadn't laid it out like that. It wasn't playful either. It looked deliberate, ceremonial. The kind of thing you find in stories right before someone vanishes. I checked the radio again, even though we hadn't used it since the last distorted. Message. The battery was dead, or maybe drained. It had been fully charged when we left. The solar pack hadn't helped. It was like the radio had been bled out. Mia found my journal soaked in water even though it hadn't rained. My notes were still. They're mostly illegible, but I could make out certain fragments. Trees leaned like listeners. Roots moving at night and something under us. I didn't remember writing that last one, but it was in my handwriting. A page later, in different ink, was a phrase neither of us claimed. She's not in the forest. She is the forest. The ink was reddish-brown, too dark to be pen. By midday, Mia stopped talking. It's not out of fear or anger, but as if words were too heavy now. Her focus shifted inward. I caught her standing still with her eyes closed, her fingers pressed into the dirt, humming softly. It wasn't a tune I knew. It wasn't anything she'd ever hummed before. When I touched her shoulder, she blinked and looked at me like she didn't recognize who I was. Only for a second, but it was enough. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded slower, heavier, like it took effort to get the words out. "We're just guests," she said. "Guests don't get to move the furniture." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know. That night, we didn't make camp. We just walked until we couldn't walk anymore, then collapsed under a curved willow whose trunk had grown in the shape of a question mark. I didn't sleep. The whispering was louder now. It echoed from the ground, from the roots, from inside the tent. At some point before dawn, Mia sat up straight. No warning, just rigid, like a puppet on a string. Her eyes were wide, but she wasn't looking at anything in particular. I whispered her name. No response. I tried again. Louder, still nothing. Her lips parted and she whispered, "She's here." Then she turned her head slowly toward the tent wall. I followed her gaze and saw the shape of a hand pressing through the nylon from the outside. 5 long fingers, not quite human, the middle one's far too long. It didn't press in like something pushing its way through. It rested. There. Waiting. Then it vanished. When I unzipped the flap and looked out, there was nothing. No prints, no damage. Just trees, standing a little closer than they had been the night before. And Mia, still staring. She didn't speak again until daylight. When she did, she just said, "We shouldn't have touched anything." That morning, we tried to head downhill. We didn't know where we were going anymore. Not really, but instinct told us that going down might get us closer to roads, or at least out of whatever zone we'd been stuck in. The only problem was, the terrain didn't cooperate. Every path that sloped downward would double back within minutes, turning us in a wide, lazy circle until we ended up right where we started. It was like the forest was folding space around us, not just changing but looping. We passed a dead tree with 3 claw marks on the trunk at least 6 times. On the 4th pass, we found one of Mia's hair ties on the ground in front of it. She hadn't taken her hair down once since we'd started. She didn't say a word, just picked it up and kept walking. Around noon, we came across something that broke me a little. It was our tent, our exact tent. The same model, same color. Same patched tear in the mesh door from a trip 3 years ago. It was staked into the ground in the middle of a clearing we had never seen before. No gear inside, no backpacks. Just the tent, perfectly clean and zipped closed. We both just stared at it. I finally forced myself to unzip it while Mia stood 10 feet behind me, silent. Inside, there were 2 sleeping bags again, ours, arranged. In the same way we always did, hers on the left, mine on the right. On top of my bag was a notebook. My notebook. But not the one I'd been carrying. It was bone dry, pristine, and full of entries I hadn't written, or at least I don't remember writing. But the handwriting was mine. The pages described events that hadn't happened, moments that felt real but were out of order, like memories belonging to a different version of me. At the back, in jagged letters that dipped below the lines, were the words, "Rootbound is a place, not a thing. It learns, IT trades." Mia walked away while I was still reading. She didn't ask what it said. She already knew. We burned the tent. That might sound dramatic, but something about seeing it there waiting, familiar, made my skin crawl. It felt like bait, like it was meant to be found. So we dumped a pouch of fuel tabs and set it ablaze. The plastic shriveled fast, the synthetic fabric twisting and curling in on itself, like it was trying to escape the fire. The flames weren't hot, not really, but they gave off this awful smell, sweet and sick, like burning hair and wet mulch. We stood there and watched it until there was nothing left but smoldering nylon and a zipper that had melted into a single fused line. As the smoke drifted upward, I thought I saw something watching from behind the trees. Not a personal shape. I could fully make out. It's just a suggestion of height, of stillness, of presence. When I blinked, it was gone. Or maybe it had never been there. Hard to say anymore. Later that evening, we found a message. Not written, not carved, built out of our belongings. Our sleeping pads had been tied between 2 trees using pieces of our own clothing. Shoes we'd lost days ago were arranged in a tight circle, pointing inward.
Ow.
In the center was the radio, its faceplate removed, wiring exposed and looped into a crude spiral. Above it, hanging from a branch, was the laminated map, now covered in dark stains that looked too thick to be mud. Mia froze when she saw it. Could tell she wanted to cry, but didn't want to show it. She just reached out and touched one of the shoes gently, as if hoping to wake it up from a bad dream. That's when the whispering started again. This time, it said one word, clear, sharp, stay. We both heard it. No doubt, not in our heads. Not a hallucination. A voice, a command. We didn't stay. We ran. Not fast. We were too tired for that, but with purpose. We didn't speak. Just moved through the forest with the same thought burning behind our eyes. We weren't supposed to burn the tent. That had been a mistake, not just symbolically, but tactically. We had reacted. Challenged something ancient, and now it was done playing subtle. The next hour was a blur. The forest grew darker faster than it should have. Trees that had once been recognizable were now different. Bark split wide open. Branches tipped with what looked like teeth. It's not real teeth, but close enough to unsettle. We didn't rest. We didn't eat. There was no point. The vines were getting bolder, too. Curling out from under rocks, slithering along the trail. Mia tripped once and came up with welts on her handskin, red lashes that throbbed like fresh rope burns. I offered to stop and check them, but she shook her head. "It wants to slow us down," she said. "We can't let it." Her voice was hoarse, dry. She hadn't drunk water in hours. We were both falling apart. At dusk? We stopped because the path opened into a wide glade, and because in the center of that glade stood a tree like nothing I'd ever seen. It was massive, maybe 80 feet tall, trunk gnarled and spiraling, its roots exposed and fanned outward in all directions like a spider's legs. And in the hollows of those roots, faces, not real ones. Not entirely, but carved, shaped, dozens of them, some distorted by time, some too fresh. Some looked eerily like people we'd seen in the Ranger brochure, slight, warped versions. Of ourselves, Mia walked toward it slowly, like drawn. I held her back. She didn't fight me, but she kept staring at the tree like it was calling her. I didn't hear it, but I felt it. In my gut, in my bones. Pressure, a pull, a want. That was the tree in her dreams. I knew it without being told. I could feel its sorrow like a blanket over the glade. This wasn't just a forest, it was a graveyard, a shrine. Maybe both. We were standing in the middle of its cathedral. We never agreed to leave. There was no moment of resolution, no mutual nod or declaration. We just started walking again, both of us knowing without saying that we were done. It's done pretending the map would save us. Done looking for paths that didn't lead back to the same cursed tree or the same patch of ground that changed its shape while we slept. Done hoping the forest would let us go because we'd learned our lesson. It wasn't about lessons anymore. It was about whether it was finished with us. That was the part I couldn't shake, because sometimes it felt like it was watching, and other times like it was waiting. We weren't walking to escape. We were walking to find out if we were allowed to leave. We hiked straight through. That night, following the tree line in whatever direction looked the most unfamiliar. There was no trail anymore, just soft underbrush and roots that grabbed at our ankles with every step. Mia tripped once and didn't get up for several seconds. When I pulled her up, she had a nosebleed and couldn't remember falling. She kept muttering about her dad's garden back in Bend, asking me if we'd watered the tomatoes. I told her. We had. I lied. The forest didn't just want our bodies, it wanted pieces of us. Memories, thoughts, language. It wanted to see what would happen when we unraveled slowly. I think it liked the idea that we were unraveling each other in the process. Sometime after dawn, we stumbled out onto a dirt road washed out, overgrown, but unmistakably man-made. It cut across a shallow slope, just wide enough for a maintenance truck. We stopped, looked at each other like we were seeing ghosts. Then we ran. I don't remember how long, just that eventually we found a trail marker. Not one of the makeshift ones from the binder, an official one. Numbers, distance estimates, the works. We had made it out, or at least into a part of the forest someone still claimed to know. The feeling that hit me then was hard to name. It wasn't joy. It was too brittle. It wasn't relief either. Just a sharp spike of awareness, like being pulled from deep water, only to realize you still couldn't breathe. We reached the edge of a ranger station about 6 hours later, not the one we checked in through, a different one, older, half-closed. For the season, the man inside looked startled when we came in. It's not horrified, not even alarmed, just ... confused. Like he hadn't expected anyone from that side of the forest. We told him everything in pieces. What we'd seen, what we'd lost. I even showed him the photo on Mia's phone of the spiral made from our cookware. He asked us if we'd taken any mushrooms before entering. He said people sometimes reported feeling watched in the denser corridors, that wildlife was known to behave oddly in areas of regrowth. But the moment we mentioned the carved tree with the faces, his tone changed. He asked for exact coordinates. We didn't have any. Our GPS hadn't worked in days. When I asked why it mattered, he said, because we're not supposed to send people that deep anymore. Then he scribbled something on a yellow pad and slipped it under a file folder where we couldn't see. That's when I knew he wasn't surprised. He just didn't want to admit it. We gave him the binder. He looked at it like he didn't recognize it until he flipped to the back, and something in his face tightened. His mouth flattened, and he nodded once but said nothing. We asked who had created it. He said, "It's not official material." When we pressed, he gave a vague smile and said, "Some interns make things up sometimes. Gets passed around, like local lore." But it wasn't a joke. The maps were too accurate, symbols too practiced. It hadn't been a prank. It had been a test, worse, an invitation. I could feel Mia's grip tighten on my arm. She was shaking, not out of fear but rage. "You knew," she said, her voice cracking. "You knew something was there." The ranger didn't answer, just stood up and said, "I'll have someone give you a ride out. You don't need to walk anymore." That phrase stuck in my head. You don't need to walk anymore. It's like it wasn't just kindness. It's like it was part of the script. The ride back to town was silent. Neither of us talked to the driver. I don't even remember what he looked like. Just a flannel shirt, mirrored glasses, and hands that didn't match his age. I kept waiting for him to ask what we'd seen, but he didn't. He just drove. And when we passed the edge of the forest boundary, the trees looked different, taller, straighter, as if whatever was alive in the center of that forest had never reached this far war, didn't need to. That night in the motel, I found dirt under my fingernails. Deep black soil. I scrubbed my hands until they were raw, didn't come out. Mia sat in the shower for almost an hour, humming that same wordless tune she'd picked up from the dream. She didn't even realize she was doing it. I didn't tell her. Still haven't. 2 days after we got home, a small package showed up. No return address. Inside was a bundle of dried roots tied with red twine. No note, no message. Just the smell, wet moss, blood, and the same sweetness that had soaked our tent that first strange morning. Mia wanted to burn it, but I said no. I didn't know why. It just felt ... wrong. Like destroying it would be seen as rude. It's like we were still being watched. I put it in the garage inside a metal ammo box and locked it up. Every few days, I still check on it. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and the dog is asleep at our feet, I swear I hear it humming back. It's been 3 months since we left the forest. Our friends all assumed we'd had a rough time, maybe gotten lost, maybe dehydrated. We didn't tell them the truth. Not all of it. How could we? Can't just sit across from someone. At brunch and explain that you were nearly consumed by a grieving ecosystem. The trees moved and whispered and wore your own memories like costumes. That your mind still replays the same images every night like clockwork. You can't say that out loud and expect anyone to look at you the same way afterward. So we laughed it off. Got turned around, we said. Bad maps. Old trails. We're lucky we found our way out. We smiled. Toasted. And I watched Mia stir her coffee for 10 full minutes without taking a sip. Her eyes never left the center of the cup. She said the swirl looked like roots. I knew better than to argue. First, the signs were small. I started waking up with dirt in the sheets, not clumps, just fine. Dark grit scattered near my feet. I vacuumed, changed the bedding. It came back. Mia's hair, once smooth and straight, developed tangles at the base of her neck-tight little knot she couldn't brush out. She began trimming it shorter and shorter until she eventually shaved the whole thing off. She said it made her feel lighter. I didn't press. We both started hearing things at night, soft tapping at the windows, like branches on glass. Except we live on the 3rd floor. We told ourselves it was the wind. It became harder to believe when we began finding leaves in the hallway, outside our apartment door. Fresh ones, wet with dew. No explanation for how they got there. No trees nearby, It was like the forest had given us something, and now it was checking in. The worst part is the dreams. We don't talk about them, but I know we're having. The same ones. I'll wake in a sweat and glance over to see Mia, already sitting up, eyes wide, staring at the wall. Sometimes she mumbles in her sleep words I don't recognize, but that feel familiar. Sometimes I do the same. She recorded me once, played it back, my voice low and slow, saying, "They won't bury her. They feed her." I don't remember. Dreaming it, but it felt right. It's like something I knew once and forgot. The weeping woman is always there, wrapped in vines. But she's changing. It's less sad now. More ... aware. She watches us like she's waiting for a choice to be made. And sometimes, in the dream, Mia walks toward her. It's closer every time. I can't stop her. I don't even try. In the last dream, I stayed behind. But I could hear them talking, and the trees leaned in to listen. 3 weeks ago, I saw something. On Mia's lower back, while she was getting out of the shower, at first I thought it was a rash red lines, raised and clustered. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. It was a shape, spiral, like the one we found near the cookware. I didn't say anything. I should have. But I was afraid that if I acknowledged it, it would become real, that it would spread. Maybe it already is. I've started to itch at night, not skin deep deeper, like something growing inside, pushing outward. Sometimes I wake up with bruises shaped like vines. I keep telling myself I'm pressing against the bed frame, but it's all psychological. But there's a new smell in the room some nights. It's that same earthy sweetness. And our houseplants, they're thriving. Overgrowing their pots, leaves too wide, too waxy. The roots pressed against the window like fingers. A week ago, we got another package. Same as before, a return address. This time it held a single object, a scrap of fabric, frayed and old, stained with that deep rust-colored blotch. I knew what it was before I even picked it up. It was the band from Mia's wrist, the tracker from the forest. It's the one we thought had fallen off. But here it was intact, as if it had never left her body. We didn't say a word, stared at it, then locked it away with the first package. But that night, the whispering returned. Not in the air, not from the trees, from inside the walls. It said, "One root always stays." Looking back, though, I don't think we ever left. Not really. Crossed a threshold out there, some ancient line the map never showed. Something old and grieving noticed us, and in our arrogance we thought we could just walk away. But the forest doesn't work like that. It doesn't forget, doesn't forgive, and it doesn't stop growing. That's what rootbound means. You leave, but something stays. A piece of you, thought, a seed. And slowly, quietly, it puts down roots. One morning you wake up and you're not afraid anymore, but not because it's over, because now you belong. I don't know how much longer we'll last like this, whether something will break, whether we'll go back, but I do know this, the forest is watching. And the next time it calls, we won't have a choice. When my Aunt Carla passed, I was the one they called. I wasn't her closest relative. That was my dad, but he hadn't spoken to her in years. Not since their argument about the property. I barely remembered the details, just that it had something to do with her refusing to sell the family cabin up in the Oregon wilderness. That place is cursed, he used to mutter under his breath, but never loud enough for me to press further. Still, when the lawyer reached out and told me I'd inherited the land and whatever remained of her belongings, it felt strange. I hadn't seen Carla since I was 13. She used to send me letters every fall, postcards with trees on fire in color, handwritten notes in precise cursive. The last one came 2 years ago and just said, "Don't let them take it. Someone needs to stay." At the time, I thought she meant the land developers who had been sniffing around. Now, I'm not so sure. Looking back, though, I should have realized this wasn't just about real estate. Not even close. I drove up alone in late October, a week after the funeral. My dad didn't want to come. Said he'd already buried. Carla, in his own way, didn't ask questions when I told him I was going to see the cabin. Didn't even say goodbye. The road was narrow and half-eaten by moss. It's the kind of place that doesn't show up right on Google Maps. I had to rely on the directions in Carla's final envelope typed. Not printed like. She didn't trust anyone else's tools. I followed a dirt road marked with nothing but a bent U.S. forestry sign, the numbers scratched off with something sharp. When I reached the clearing, the place looked almost exactly how I remembered it. A one-story ranger station, squat and slanted from years of snow and neglect, with a rusted lookout tower crouched behind it like a tired sentinel. Everything smelled of cedar and decay. Almost turned around. I should have. But I'd come this far. Inside the cabin, everything was coated in a fine layer of dust. Not cobwebs, Carla wouldn't have allowed that, but the dust of silence of long stretches without conversation. The air was heavy, still. Place had been holding its breath for years. I opened windows. Let in light. Didn't help. The walls were covered in pinned-up maps, not just of hiking routes and forest growth, but strange topographical sketches that seemed hand-drawn. Some had circles on them. Others, X's in red marker. Most were dated in the bottom corner with a looping CM. I wandered through the kitchen, the storage room, the old bunk. Everything was familiar and not. Time had done its slow work, and yet something in the layout felt preserved, like she knew someone would return. On the desk was a stack of notebooks. Most were weather logs, patrol routes, trail maintenance records, but one, thicker and bound, in black leather, sat apart from the others. The name on the spine had faded, but the first page left no doubt. It was a journal, Carla's, or so I thought. The date on the inside cover said 1981. I should have known better than to open it. That first night, I should have waited. The signs were all there. The pages weren't in perfect conditions. Some were torn, others stained with coffee or something darker. But the handwriting was sharp. It's controlled. The entries began normally enough. Notes about park patrols, trail conditions, animal sightings. But by the third page, the tone shifted. Words like misplaced hiker reappeared at wrong trailhead, and deer standing still for 6 hours began appearing. One sentence was underlined twice. He was walking away, but his shadow stayed facing me. Another entry, later on, described hearing footsteps outside the cabin when no one was scheduled to be there. I sat up reading long into the night, heart drumming louder with each page. And then, right before I turned in, I found a half-torn paragraph that read, "There's something else in these woods. It's not animal, not human. I call it the warden. No explanation, no context. It's just that." I closed the journal and sat in the dark for a long time, listening. For what? I wasn't sure. The next day, I called my dad. I told him I was cleaning the place out, boxing things up. I asked him about the journal, if he knew anything. He got real quiet. Then in a tone I hadn't heard from him since the day his father died, he said, "That place took something from her. Don't let it take you too." And then he hung up. No goodbye, no elaboration. I stood there holding the phone, staring out at the tree line that pressed in like a wall. The forest didn't feel hostile. It felt ... aware, like it had been waiting for someone to open that journal again, and I had. I'll skip the boring stuff, sorting gear, taking photos for inventory, labeling storage bins. I'll tell you this. I found 3 more journals hidden in the crawl space beneath the sea. Floorboards. All older. All filled with entries that didn't match Carla's handwriting. Some belonged to other rangers. Some were anonymous. One was half-burned. But the stories were similar. Repeating. Hikers appearing in 2 places at once. Animals frozen. Mid-motion, like time had paused. Trees growing in spiral patterns overnight. And always, the warden. Sometimes it was a presence, sometimes a shape. Never clearly described. One entry just said, "You'll know it by what doesn't. Move. I've tried to shake the feeling that something passed between Carla and me when I inherited this place. That it wasn't just land and memory, that I've inherited a role, a responsibility, and whatever the warden is. I think it's still out there, watching, waiting for the next name on the journal to start writing." The second night I couldn't sleep. I thought I was just tired from the drive, the dust, the emotional weight of it all. But it wasn't that. It was the way the silence pressed in once the sun went down. No bird song. No bugs, not even wind. Just an unnatural stillness that felt heavier than quiet should ever feel. I'd brought a small space heater, and even that low hum felt too loud. Every creak of the cabin sounded magnified, like the wood was reacting to more than temperature. I kept looking at the door, expecting ... something. I don't know what. I'd locked it, triple-checked it. But still, I had the unmistakable sense that someone was standing just beyond it, listening. Not trying to get in, just standing there. It's like a patient observer waiting for me to make a mistake. I finally fell asleep around 4 a.m., but it wasn't restful. I dreamed I was back in the crawl space, only this time, the journals were still. Being written ink, appearing on the pages in real time, handwriting that looked like mine. In the dream, I turned a page and saw my name written over and over, dozens of times in a circle. When I woke, my hand was smeared with ink, except I hadn't written anything, and the pen was still capped. That morning, I went back under the floorboards. I needed to know if I'd imagined the other journals, if maybe it had all been one long bad dream. But they were still there. It's dustier now, or maybe I just hadn't looked closely before. Each one had a different ranger name. Etched inside the cover, some in faded pencil, others scratched into the leather itself. One dated back to 1954. Most of the entries were normal at first weather, patrols, routine maintenance. But gradually, every single one veered into the strange. They all mentioned trails, changing location, wildlife that acted wrong, and something just beyond the trees that made them question whether they were alone, even when no one else was registered to be in the area. A common phrase kept popping up, scrawled differently in each journal, but unmistakably present. The warden doesn't come closer, you come further. It made my skin crawl. I sat there on the cold wood, surrounded by notebooks full of madness, or warning, or both, and realized I was probably reading the same stories Carla had read in her final months. The same ones she hadn't dared show anyone else. I wondered what it had cost her to keep them hidden. I started noticing the clocks didn't match. That was the next sign. My phone said 2:46 p.m., but the clock on the wall behind the desk insisted it was 3:12. I chalked it up to an old battery. But then my watch started lagging too. By the time I made lunch, it was over an hour behind. I set everything back, restarted the phone, replaced the clock battery. For a few hours, things lined up again. Then, as dusk approached, they drifted apart, once more subtle at first, but eventually obvious. Time wasn't working right here, not in a big cinematic way, just in the small ways that make you doubt your footing, start second-guessing. How long it's been since your last meal, or whether you've really been reading that journal for 3 hours. You stop trusting your senses. That's when I started marking things. A line of chalk on the doorframe, a circle drawn around the salt canister on the counter. Just little things to prove to myself that reality was holding steady. By the next morning, 2 of the chalk lines were smudged upward toward the ceiling. I sure as hell hadn't touched them. That day, I heard a voice. Not close, not loud, but familiar. I was in the old supply shed behind the station, checking what was left of Carla's gear. I heard someone call my name just once. Soft. From the tree line. It sounded like Carla, but when I turned, there was no one, and no footprints in the snow-dusted ground leading in or out of the woods. I stood there for nearly 10 minutes, waiting, listening. It didn't come again, but I knew it had happened. Not a dream, not stress, a voice. One that shouldn't be. There, and it wasn't the last. That evening, I heard it again, this time, from the attic above the station. That was the moment I realized how isolated I really was. The nearest ranger outpost was 20 miles away. My truck hadn't started. That morning, even though the battery was fine, the CB radio buzzed, but never connected to dispatch. And my cell phone, once reliable up here, now sat dark. No bars, even when I walked to higher ground. The silence wasn't just a lack of noise, it was deliberate. Something was keeping me from leaving, or at least from telling anyone what I was finding. That night, I read more of Carla's final entries. They were different from the early ones, rushed, desperate. The handwriting became looser, more chaotic. She started referring to herself in the third person. The ranger sees things again tonight, or she should not open the door this time. She described seeing figures on the trail cams, but the footage would always show static. Once, she claimed to have watched herself enter the cabin 20 minutes before she actually did. Like the forest had created a loop, or a copy. The line that chilled me most came near the end of the journal. She is not alone, but there are no other people. That night, I turned every light on in the station. It didn't help. Shadows clung to the corners anyway. And when I passed the mirror in the hallway, for just a second, I thought my reflection didn't follow me right away. It was late, I was tired, but still, ... I turned that mirror around. I haven't looked into it since. It started with footsteps. On the roof, I told myself it was a raccoon, maybe a squirrel. But when I stepped outside that morning, there were no paw prints in the thin dusting of snow. Just a pair of wide indentations, too far apart to be a small animal. Not boot prints exactly, but the shape of something heavy, pressed deep. I stood there for a while, staring up at the low tin roof, and tried to talk myself out of it. Maybe wind had knocked something over. Maybe the sound just felt like footsteps, but I'd heard each one, slow and deliberate, traveling from one side of the cabin to the other, stopping right above my bed. Looking back, though, the real clue wasn't the noise itself. It was the fact that my sleep wasn't interrupted by it. I only remembered hearing the sound after I was already awake, as if something had let me hear it after. It had passed, like an echo of something I'd already missed. Later that afternoon, I went back into the attic for the first time since. Arriving, I told myself I needed to check for animal nests, maybe a loose shingle. But that wasn't the reason. I needed to know if someone had actually been up there. The ladder creaked as I climbed. I had my phone flashlight in one hand and Carla's old crowbar in the other. The attic smelled like dry insulation and old books. So nothing jumped out at me. No animals, no obvious signs of intrusion. But there were footprints in the dust. Human-shaped, bare. They didn't lead in or out, just formed a circle near the far corner one I didn't remember ever stepping into. At the center of the circle, something had been left behind. A small, spiral-carved wooden disc, old, weather-worn. It was cracked down the middle and smelled faintly of cedar and burnt paper. I left it where I found it. No way was I bringing that thing back down with me. When I climbed out of the attic, I pulled the hatch shut and dragged a chair under it. Not that it would help, but I needed to believe I could still draw lines. The journal pages started changing after that. It wasn't immediate, just small details at first. A phrase I swore had read North Trailhead now said South Bend Overlook. A date changed by one day. Then a full page appeared where there hadn't been one before, wedged between two entries from 1987. This one wasn't signed, but it described an encounter almost identical to my own. Footsteps above the cabin, a spiral disc in the attic, a scent of cedar and smoke. Final line read, "It's learning my schedule now." That stopped me cold. I flipped through the rest of the journal, found 3 more new pages in different places, all handwritten in different styles, all with entries that described recent things I had seen or felt. I checked my laptop where I'd logged each journal's table of contents. None of those pages had been there before. I'm not sure if someone's adding them, or if the cabin is. Either way, it feels like I'm not just reading history anymore. I'm part of the book, and the book is still writing itself. The next few nights blurred together. I barely slept. The temperature inside the cabin never matched the outside. It was too warm, even without the heater. My skin started itching, in patches, especially around my shoulders and neck. I chalked it up to stress until I noticed the pattern. The rash wasn't random. It was forming small ridges, circles, like growth rings on a tree. I stopped looking in mirrors. Even polished glass made me nervous. Every time I caught my reflection, I got the sense that I was just a few seconds ahead of it. It wasn't copying me exactly as was watching. Around midnight on the fifth night, I woke up to find every journal on the desk stacked neatly, except the one I'd been reading. It was open to a page I hadn't reached yet, even though I was sure I'd left it closed. The page had only one sentence: "The warden prefers silence." I shut the book hard and walked out of the cabin in my socks, needing air. Needing to not be inside that box of creaking wood and flickering lights. The trees outside swayed gently, though. There was no wind. That was the first time I really felt it, that pressure, like the whole forest was leaning in toward me. Not malevolent? Not yet, but expectant. Like it wanted to see what I'd do next, or what I'd write. By morning, I'd made a decision. I had to leave. Even if it meant abandoning the inheritance, the journals, the promise I'd made to clean things out. I couldn't stay in a place that rewrote itself around me. But when I packed up the car and turned the key, nothing happened. The engine didn't even click, just silence. The dash lights didn't flicker. My phone was still dead. The emergency radio only played static, interrupted occasionally by what sounded like someone breathing. Long, slow breaths. I screamed into the woods, hoping for a reaction. And something did answer. It wasn't a scream. It was a soft crackling sound, like branches snapping under slow, heavy feet, coming from the tree line. Then, a voice. My own, I think, whispered back. She knows now. She sees it too. I didn't move for a long time after that. I just sat in the driver's seat and stared at the treetops, waiting, listening, trying to pretend there was still a way out. By day 7, I stopped pretending this was just some haunting. Hauntings are human. They come with faces and motives. Vengeance or love gone sour. This was older, wilder, less personal and more systemic, like the forest itself was running an experiment, and I'd stumbled into the test zone. The journals were no longer enough. I started searching for anything Carla had kept offline. Her old filing cabinets, floppy disks, even the shoebox of photos shoved behind the bookcase. That's when I found the envelope marked RD Field Reports Do Not Submit, tucked. Between weather logs from the late 80s, it was full of typed sheets incident reports Carla had written but never turned in. Each one dated, stamped, and signed with her Ranger ID, but all marked void in thick red marker. On one, someone had scribbled "Not actionable. Do not escalate." The contents of those reports made my skin crawl. Ooh, 2 hikers seen at opposite ends of the same trailhead within the same hour. A hunter who claimed he followed his brother into the trees, only to find him waiting at the car, confused and pale. A park biologist who vanished after collecting moss samples, only to return a week later changed. He couldn't speak, stared and pointed at the ground, repeating the word roots over and over until he hanged himself. One report detailed a conversation Carla had with an older ranger named Mitchell, a man whose name came up several times in the earlier journals. She quoted him as saying, "The warden's not a person, it's a balance. It steps in when the forest's memory gets too full." That stuck with me. A balance of what? Of who? I flipped the report over and found a Polaroid clipped to the bokeh blurry shot of a dark figure standing in the trail about 30 yards behind Carla. At first, I thought it was a trick of the trees, but the more I stared, the more its outline became clear, tall, thin, and impossibly still. No face, no movement, not even blur, like it had been painted in after the fact. And it looked familiar, not from memory, but from one of my recent dreams. The one where I'm in the crawl space and the books are writing themselves. In that dream, there's always something watching from the attic opening. Something that doesn't breathe. That figure. I shoved the photo away and locked the drawer. But all that did was trap the thought inside the cabin with me. I should have known better than to dig into Carla's personal lockbox, but I couldn't stop myself. I pried it open with the crowbar one night after hearing my name spoken again, this time from inside the supply shed. Inside the box were dozens of labeled tapes, audio reels, VHS, mini cassettes. One of them was labeled "Last Night, Do Not Play Alone." Played it anyway. The audio was mostly quiet at first. Then footsteps, breathing. Then Carla's voice whispering, "I've seen myself in places I haven't been yet." Static. Crackled in and out. Then another voice identical to hers said back, "That's because you left pieces." I turned the tape off. My skin felt too tight, like it didn't quite fit. I checked my reflection again, against my better judgment. My eyes looked just a little too wide, like something behind them was leaning forward, just barely pushing. I turned every mirror in the cabin toward the walls after that. The next morning, I discovered the crawlspace trapdoor had been nailed shut from the inside. I never did that. I hadn't gone under there in days. When I finally forced it open again, the books were rearranged. One had been opened to a page I hadn't seen before. A ranger from 1963 had scrawled a warning across the margin. "The warden arrives when the forest forgets. It is memory made flesh," claimed the forest had too many stories. That the weight of lost hikers, old blood, and misremembered trails had congealed into something thinking. Something tasked with preserving the wilderness by adjusting what can't be filed away. It hit me then. What if the disappearances weren't accidents? What if they were edits? The forest doesn't forget, it reformats, like cleaning up corrupted data. And somehow, Carla had figured this out. Stayed. Maybe to protect others. Maybe because she had no choice. But what scared me most wasn't the theory. It was the growing certainty that I was now being categorized. Not just observed, logged, and potentially rewritten. I tried to burn one. Of the journals, just one. A newer one. Brittle and soaked with that musty mildew smell that had started leaking from the attic. I took it outside to the fire pit, doused it with lighter fluid, and lit a match. It didn't catch. Not even a little. The paper blackened at the edges, but refused to curl or crumble. The fire fizzled like I'd tried to burn wet rock. When I brought the book back inside, the page I'd tried to burn was gone. In its place was a new page, one that read, "No deletions, only copies." I dropped it on the floor. I swear it twitched before it went still. After that, I stopped trying to fight. I focused on documenting, recording, writing down everything I could, even if I wasn't sure who it was for. Maybe that was the only thing Carla could do in the end, keep records. Because if the forest must forget, then maybe someone, somewhere, has to remember. And yet, every night since then, the sound of writing echoes faintly from the attic. Not the scrawl of a pen, not typing. It's a slow, deliberate scratching, like someone etching words into wood with their fingernails. I've tried recording it, but the audio always plays back empty except once. One file, 2 seconds long. The only audible line was my own voice whispering, "She's reading it now." I never said that, not out loud. Yet there it was. My voice, confirming that something was watching my every turn of the page. Every thought. Every fear. There's no such thing as silence here anymore. Not true silence. It's layered, now quiet on the surface, but with threads of sound running beneath it, like whispers under floorboards or breath in your ear when you're the only one in the room. The scratching in the attic hasn't stopped. It's become rhythmic, almost metronomic, and I've started to believe it's not just random. I tried recording it again last night just to prove I wasn't losing my mind. This time, the recorder played back something. Not words exactly, but a pattern. A code. I looped it, slowed it down, analyzed the spacing. Every scratch was spaced in threes, with one pause between every set. Morse code? I tried translating, but only one word made any kind of sense. Under. The rest devolved into gibberish. I would have written it off if not for what I found beneath the sink the next morning. A hole, freshly dug, just big enough for a hand. To reach through, no animals nearby, no soil disturbance. It's just a tunnel that hadn't been there the day before, leading into dark earth. And roots. I lost 6 hours that afternoon. Not figuratively, I mean I lost them. One moment I was documenting the hole, shining my flashlight inside. The next, I was standing in the middle of the forest with my hands scraped raw on my boots. Missing. My watch said 7:12 p.m. I'd gone out at 1:05. I retraced my steps. Or what I thought were my steps, but the trail kept shifting. The trees curved inward in ways they hadn't before, like elbows pressed into a secret. Every time I thought I recognized a marker, a bent birch, a broken rock, I'd get closer and realize it had changed. Not just wasn't what I thought, but had somehow rearranged itself in the seconds before I arrived. Eventually, I stopped walking, sat down on a fallen log, and waited. That's when I heard it. My own voice, calling my name. It's not an echo, not a recording. It was my voice. But not. Mine, softer. Wrong in the mouth. It came from behind me and repeated a line I hadn't spoken aloud in days. You can't unknow this now. I ran. When I finally stumbled back into the cabin, my socks were shredded and bleeding. My hands were full of tiny slivers, bark, and root. The door was already unlocked, though I know I locked it before I left. Worse still, the table had been cleared. All the journals gone, vanished, except one. Sitting in the center, open. My handwriting on the most recent page. My name, the date. An entry describing exactly what had just happened in the woods. Only I hadn't written it. I hadn't. The pen was still capped in my backpack. But there. It was every detail of the last 6 hours laid out in my tone, in my cadence, in my spacing. It felt like something had ghost-written my memory, like the forest had reached into my head and taken dictation. I locked every door, pushed furniture against the exits. I even jammed the attic hatch shut with a steel rod. Still, I didn't sleep. Not really. Sometime, just before dawn, I heard breathing behind the walls. Not in the walls behind them. Like there was space I couldn't see. It moved with purpose, slow and steady, sliding from one end of the cabin to the other. I held my breath and waited, hoping it would pass. Instead, it paused right behind the mirror I'd covered in the hallway. The mirror began to pulse. Not Shinja's pulse, like a heartbeat trapped in glass. And then it cracked. No shattering, just a single deep fissure down the middle. I didn't remove the covering, I just backed away. But before I reached the end of the hall, I heard it again, my voice whispering closer, always closer. Like the forest was shrinking around me, drawing its edges tight until I had nowhere left to move. That was the night I opened the crawl space again, to hide or to search, but because I didn't know where else to go. The attic was alive with sound. The mirror was cracked. The front door no longer led to the same porch I remembered. So I went down. The air was colder beneath the cabin, damp with rot. The journals had returned stacked in a neat pile beneath the foundation. All of them open to blank pages. Waiting. I don't know why, but I started writing. Not thoughts, not plans. Just details, the shape of a certain tree, the number of times the breathing had stopped, what I'd heard in the silence, and moved on its own. When I stopped, I looked up and saw a second handprint on the underside of the floorboards above me, smaller than mine, cleaner, not made by dirt or blood, but by some oily film that shimmered like tar. I climbed out. I haven't been down since. The next morning, I found a new item inside Carla's lockbox. A ranger badge that wasn't hers. It was old brass. The nameplate read M. Holloway Warden. Beneath it, etched faintly, was a phrase in Latin I had to look up. Memoria est tutela. Memory is protection. I still don't know what exactly that means in the context of this place, but I think Carla knew. I think she tried to contain whatever this was by becoming its witness. By recording, by remembering, by leaving the story unfinished. The forest needs memory to survive, but too much of it breaks the ecosystem. So the warden steps in, not to punish, but to edit, to reduce, to rebalance the ledger. And I'm next. I can feel it in the way the journal pages now flip themselves open, the way my reflection doesn't blink when I do, the way I can hear my own breath, even when I'm holding it. I packed everything that morning, every journal, the badge, my recorder, the tapes. I didn't care how much it weighed. I just wanted to be gone. I mapped out a route using an old survey map I'd found tucked behind the filing cabinet one. That showed ranger access roads from decades ago. long since overgrown or erased from official records. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could follow one out of the forest's influence. I left a note on the desk just in case someone came after me. Do not stay past 7 days. Burn nothing. Remember everything. Felt ridiculous, but also vital. Like I was clinging to the only rule I had left. I shut the door behind me and started walking before I could change my mind. For the first hour, things felt normal. Quiet, even hopeful. The sun was out. The trail ahead didn't shift or vanish. My compass stayed true. I started to think it was working, until I passed the same fallen tree for the third time. The bark was distinct, split open like a jagged grin, covered in moss on only one side. It was in T. Justacia Vu. I was being looped. I changed direction, heading due north instead of northeast, then west, then back the way I thought I came. Still the same tree, the same loop. Every path bent inward no matter where I turned. I dropped breadcrumbs, literally, pieces of protein bar, bits of ribbon, chalk marks on trunks, but none of it held. The forest either absorbed them or moved around them. After 3 hours of wandering, I came across something I hadn't seen before, an old ranger tower, wooden, half-rotted, hidden beneath years of vine and weather. I climbed it out of desperation, hoping for a radio or a signal or at least a high point to scream from. Inside, I found Carla's name carved into the wall. Just her name. No date, no other markings. The carving looked old, like it had always been there, as if she had passed through this place long before she should have. In the corner sat a locked metal box. I broke it open with a rock. Inside was a recording device, battery-powered, still blinking. I hit play, and my own voice echoed back at me. It was a log, a detailed account of what I'd just unpacking. Walking, the loop, the tower, word for word. Things I hadn't even spoken aloud. I dropped the device and backed away, breathing hard. It wasn't just watching anymore. It was writing ahead, predicting, directing. I left the tower running, sprinting into the trees, not caring about direction, just movement. It didn't help. I still ended up back at the cabin 30 minutes later, soaked in sweat and with mud, up to my knees. The cabin was different now. It had grown. Wider, the roof sloped lower, closer to the ground. The windows were tinted, like old eyes squinting at me. I stepped inside, and the floor groaned. Not under me, but with me, like it was breathing again. On the desk, my note was gone. In its place was a new journal, one I hadn't seen before. Bound in leather, initials etched in gold. RD. The first page was blank. The second had only one line, freshly written in black ink. She will now choose what must be forgotten. I didn't want to understand. I didn't want to accept what it meant, but I already knew. The warden wasn't a ghost or a legend. It wasn't even a person. It was a role. A purpose the forest enforced when no one else would do it. Carla had stepped into it once, not because she wanted to, but because the forest had chosen her. And now, it had chosen me. That was the price of staying too long, of reading too much, remembering too deeply. The warden isn't someone who watches. It's someone who trims, who edits, who prunes the memory of the wilderness to keep it whole. And now the forest wanted me to take that mantle, to begin the task of forgetting what couldn't be filed. Away safely, I refused. I yelled. I tore the page from the journal and tried to burn it. This time it caught, but instead of curling into ash, it turned into thick black smoke that smelled like wet bark and spoiled meat. The smoke didn't rise. It sank, pooling across the floor like water, seeping into the crawl space. And I heard Carla's voice again. If you don't choose, the forest will. I couldn't leave. Not physically, not mentally. The journals were beginning to overlap. Pages I remembered writing appeared in older logs. Dates bent around each other. The badge on my desk now bore my name, not Carla's. My own handwriting filled margins I hadn't touched. I was being folded in, layered over whatever remained of the others before me. My mind felt stretched thin, like bark about to crack. I tried one last thing. I wrote a new entry in the blank journal, confessing everything: my memories, the timeline, the fear. I ended it with a plea. Let someone else carry this. I remember too much. When I closed the book, the cabin exhaled. The air grew still. The first time in days, the forest stopped watching. I think it was satisfied. But that's when I heard the final knock. 3 slow raps on the door. Not frantic, not threatening. Just patient. I opened it. No one was there, but a new badge sat on the steps. Cold, heavy, with one word engraved below my name: Warden. I made it out. That's the truth, at least in the most physical sense. I got in my car, turned the key, and the engine purred like nothing had ever been wrong. My phone, dead for a week, powered on as soon as I hit the tree line. No fanfare, no drama. Just like that, I was back in the world of grocery stores and cell towers, traffic and daylight that didn't whisper. But I wasn't me anymore. That's what they don't tell you about places like that. You can leave them behind, but they don't leave anything of you untouched. The ranger station is miles away now, buried in the far reaches of forest maps that don't show it. But some nights, I swear I hear that scratching again, faint, through the walls of my apartment. Beneath the hum of the fridge, it's not loud, but it's never far. Like the cabin brought a piece of itself back with me, or maybe I brought a piece of it. I went back to work 2 weeks after leaving. I thought maybe routine would dull the edges, smooth out whatever cracked inside me. I made it through orientation, small talk, even a staff meeting. But I kept looking at reflections car windows, dark screens, elevator doors, and catching something lagging just slightly behind. My own face, but wrong. Not delayed like a glitch, just thoughtful, watching, deciding. One afternoon, I found myself staring at a bush outside the office that reminded me of one near the station. Without thinking, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ranger badge, the one I'd thrown away, the one I know I left on the cabin steps. But there it was. Same brass, same inscription, still warm to the touch. I dropped it in my desk drawer and haven't opened it since. Doesn't matter. I still feel the weight of it against my chest when I wake up. I tried therapy. Therapist, it was a PTSD reaction to an intense, isolating experience in the woods. She nodded, took notes. But when I mentioned hearing my own voice outside my window at night, she stiffened, asked if I'd ever experienced auditory hallucinations. Before I lied, said yes, said it was just stress. She prescribed something mild. I never filled it, because I don't want to dull the edges anymore. I want to stay sharp. The forest taught me that. When you stop paying attention, when you stop remembering, that's when it reaches through. That's when it replaces what you were with what it needs you to be. And I think that's why Carla never came back. She never forgot. So the forest kept her, piece by piece. The real kicker came last Thursday. I got a package in the mail. No return address, no postage. Inside was a journal one I hadn't seen before, wrapped in burlap and bound with twine. The first page wasn't blank. It had my handwriting, even though I hadn't written it. A1. She thinks she's free. Let's begin again. I almost threw it out the window. Almost. But part of me didn't want to. Part of me wanted to flip the page, to keep going. Because as much as I hate to admit it, there's a comfort in the rhythm of those old pages. The loops, the retellings, the versions of me that might survive if I record them quickly enough. I think the forest knows that. It doesn't have to drag you back. It just needs to make remembering feel safer than forgetting. I haven't gone outside after dark in weeks. The plants on my windowsill bend toward the inside of the room no matter where the sun is. And when I walk past Trizemi's shadow bends, a little differently than it should. Longer, leaning, like something tall and thin is standing just beside me. I should be terrified, should run, but I've learned better. I know now why Carla stayed, why she left those journals. It wasn't duty, wasn't even guilt, it was survival. The only way to avoid being rewritten completely is to become the one holding the pen, and so I write. Every day. In new notebooks, on napkins, into voice memos. not to warn others that would be useless. No one believes until they see it, and by then it's too late. No, I write to remember, to keep the pieces of myself glued together, even if they shift sometimes. I keep the ranger badge in a box next to my bed. I never open it, but I never throw it out either, because I know. One day, I'll hear that knock again. 3 times, patient, gentle, final, and when I do, I'll already know the ending. The same one Carla did, the same one I wrote once without meaning to. There's no real leaving, only longer trails between. Return visits. The job posting didn't say much. It's a short-term communications contract, backcountry deployment, equipment provided, experience preferred. No company name, no HR contact, just a P.O. box and a burner phone number. Normally I'd skip something. That vague, but these weren't normal times. Rent was late. My credit cards were maxed out. And the box I kept under my bed, labeled Bill's Hope, was just full of unopened envelopes I couldn't afford to look at. So I called. The man on the other end didn't introduce himself. Just asked, "You've worked radios before?" I told him yes. Left out the part about why I quit. Didn't ask for references. Just gave me coordinates, a start date, and one last line before hanging up. Bring your own memory. I thought maybe it was a joke. I laughed. He didn't. It wasn't until the next morning that I really let myself sit with where the job was sending me. The coordinates pointed to a stretch of Oregon wilderness, not too far from the same watchtower where my brother, Wes, had vanished 10 years ago. They'd ruled it an accident, of course. Said the trail washed out. Maybe he slipped. No body. Ever recovered, no gear. Just his old ham radio. Found weeks later, still powered on. Still transmitting low-frequency static from inside a locked supply chest. The only reason I got into shortwave tech at all was because of him. He was older, sharper, obsessed with weather patterns and ghost frequencies. I followed him into that world like little sisters do until he didn't come back, and I dropped. Everything left the airwaves cold. But when I opened the storage tote labeled Wes, his radio was still there. Same dent in the casing, same cracked dial, he said, gave it personality. I powered it up on a whim, fully expecting nothing but snow. But the second I tuned it to 144.8, the last channel he logged before disappearing, it clicked. And then I heard it. A voice. Not just any voice. His voice. "Norm coming," he said, just like that. "Tell Jess to watch the trees." That was my name, Jess. No one else called me that except Wes. Not since. The voice repeated, then clicked. Off. I checked the battery. Dead. No signal input. The antenna wasn't even attached. That's when I knew I had to go. Not just for the money anymore. The day I left, I told my landlord I'd be out of town for a while. Slipped a post-dated check under his door. I packed light just enough for 10 days. The job listing hadn't mentioned how long the assignment was supposed to last. But I brought Wes's radio, a fresh set of notebooks, and an external recorder just in case. The drive was long. The forest grew denser the closer I got. Trees leaned in tight, like they were listening. The last 10 miles were gravel, then dirt, then barely a path. When I arrived, no one was there to greet me. Just a shack with a faded sign, U.S. Forest Service Relay 3. Inside, dust-coated everything except the chair. The equipment still worked, somehow. There were fresh logs in the stove, unburned. And a single line of writing on the desk, etched into the wood with a knife, "Repeat only what you hear." I powered up the relay console. It hummed like it had never stopped. The old VHF base sat in the corner, blinking like it had been expecting me. I unpacked Wes's unit and plugged it in alongside the station equipment. It synced almost immediately. Then the main unit blinked once, spit out a line of audio I hadn't queued. Broadcast in progress. Except I hadn't hit anything. I checked the dials. All clear. No incoming message. Nothing transmitting. Yet the log printer began spitting out lines, one word at a time. They formed a sentence I hadn't spoken in years. He didn't fall. That was the first thing I ever said when they told me Wes was gone. That I didn't believe he just fell. That something else had happened. I stood there, frozen, fingers numb. My voice echoed back through the static from the old radio at my feet. He didn't fall. I hadn't said a word. That night, the radio chirped at 3:17 a.m. I was half asleep in the bunk when the squelch hit. Loud, sharp, then Wes's voice again. Clear as day, like he was right outside. "Jess," he said, "I'm not where they left me." Static. Followed. Then silence. I recorded it. Played it back 4 times. Each time, it was clearer than before, and each time the signal strength increased. No tower in this area should do that. I checked the antennas, checked for nearby relays. Nothing, just that impossible clarity. It wasn't a recording, it wasn't a loop. He was broadcasting. Now, I stayed up the rest of the night, watching the spectrogram spike and fade. The pattern was too perfect to be atmospheric. It's too personal to be chance. I don't know what I expected when I came out here. Closure, maybe? Or just a paycheck big enough to reset my life. But that voice, it was Wes. Not like a memory, not like grief, but like a live feed from the other side of the tree line. Told myself I'd wait till dawn to investigate. But part of me knew I wasn't going to be the one calling out anymore. I was going to be the one following the signal. The next morning was unnaturally quiet. It's not peaceful, but vacant, like. Even the birds had decided the place wasn't worth their noise. I stepped out of the shack into thick dew, mist clinging low to the brush. I could hear my own footsteps crunch in the dirt and nothing else, no breeze, no insects, not even a distant rustle from the trees. It felt staged, like nature had been asked to pause. I took my coffee back inside and looked over the relay logs. Most were just timestamps and file IDs, generic stuff from auto pings between towers. But one page had been folded in half and tucked under the radio receiver. I opened it slowly. It was handwritten in tight, blocky letters. "Do not speak unless." Repeating, "Do not leave during a broadcast. Do not answer a voice that knows your name." There was no signature, but the page smelled faintly of pine tar and copper. Like the skin on your hands after holding pennies. The station's gear was older than I'd expected analog. Heavy, lots of manual dials, switches without labels. Some pieces had markings scratched out and rewritten in permanent marker. RECVA became Echo Line. Boost gain had a note that read, "Only when dark." I checked the emergency contact channel and tried to call the dispatch office listed in. The contract, no answer. I tried again. Still nothing. The line didn't even click. It just stayed open, like a breath held forever. I tested the satellite phone from the supply crate. All I got was looping static, like the feedback you'd hear when 2 walkies crossed. The only working communication was the relay system and, of course, Wes's radio. I set them both side by side on the desk and watched the VU meters. They didn't move for hours. I thought maybe the night before had been some freak residual pickup, some kind of atmospheric ghost. But then, at 1:12 p.m., the printer sputtered again. This time, it was different. No voice yet, just a string of numbers. 11, 12, 348, 52 echo. Return Jess. I froze. That last one, my name was underlined. The printer continued, "Don't turn around. Don't turn around." I stood absolutely still. Heard a sound behind me. Hadn't felt anything. But every hair on my neck stood straight up. I forced myself to look slowly. Nothing. Just the empty doorway. The forest beyond. But in the center of the threshold was a pine cone. It hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. Sitting upright. Perfect. Balanced like it had been placed. I picked it up. It was warm. Went back inside and tried to reset. The printer, hoping it was a glitch, some pre-coded prank from the last person to work this station. But the interface didn't even have a memory buffer large enough to store the kind of output I was seeing. These weren't logs. They were live, predictive, like the station was listening to more than just frequencies, like it was watching me. Think Wes's radio started to hum again just before sunset. It's that soft pulse of life just before the dial clicks on. I didn't touch anything. I just sat and waited. Then it happened. "There's something in the signal, Jess," his voice said. "It's learning you. Listening. Don't reply. Then silence. But before I could even think about whether or not to obey, the shack lights flickered and the speakers crackled again. This time, it was me. My own voice, but colder, flatter. I'm already replying. I slammed the radio off. Killed. Power to the whole board. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the fuse switch. But the worst part wasn't the voice or the message, it was the fact that for a split second, I hadn't wanted to stop it. There was something in that voice, something smooth and calm and correct. It's like a version of myself that had stopped being afraid a long time ago. And it knew something I didn't. It was like the station had kept a version of me in its walls. A ghost, not of a dead person, but a possible one. Someone becoming. I slept that night with a flashlight in one hand and a screwdriver in the other. Not for protection, just to feel weight. To feel something real. The forest outside never got truly dark. There was always a kind of static light just behind the trees, like the moon was stuck in a flicker. Around 3:30 a.m., I woke up to find my recorder running. I hadn't turned it on. The red light blinked once every second, and the speaker output had one word repeating over and over. Answer. Not a question, not a plea, a command. Over and over. Answer, answer, answer. I pulled the batteries out, but the recording kept going until the tape snapped. When I rewound the fragment, it didn't say answer anymore. Just played the sound of my brother breathing. Deep, slow, but not in a panicked way. In a resigned way, like someone waiting for a door to open that never would. The job hadn't even really started yet. There were no check-ins, no tasks beyond record and report, but there were no people either. No calls, no schedule. Just me, the radios, the printer, ... and the forest. Found an old personnel photo. Shoved into the back of the drawer that night. 5 people, all in ranger uniforms. 4 were labeled. The 5th had no name, just an X. The face was scratched out. But the weirdest thing, scratched out figure was wearing my brother's boots. I knew them. Scar on the right heel, duct tape around the toe from that time he kicked a metal cabinet. It was him. It had to be. But the photo was dated in 1986, and Wes hadn't even been born yet. By the 3rd day, I started keeping my own rulebook. Not the one printed in the orientation pack at time, mine, rules I picked up through patterns, strange repetitions, things that felt off but didn't immediately scream danger. Rule 1. Never speak when the radio is on unless you're reading something already printed. Not even a whisper, not even to yourself. I learned that after the first slip when I muttered, "This can't be real," and the printer immediately spit out, "But it is." Rule 2. Don't play back your recordings after dark. One night I did, just for a second. The audio was warped, distorted, slowed, like someone dragging a nail through tape. But buried underneath in the hiss and grain was a second voice that sounded like me, but it laughed. Rule 3. Don't touch the pine cones. There were more now. Dozens left just outside the shack each morning in careful circles. They always disappeared by midday. The logs were changing too. The auto transcripts, which were supposed to track weather readings and nearby station pings, had started including unrelated messages. Snippets of phone calls I'd had months ago. It's my voice. Wes's voice. Sometimes even people I hadn't spoken to in years. I found one entry that quoted a conversation I'd had with a professor during undergrad. A throwaway comment about electromagnetic fields and spiritual experiences. Another entry read, "She will believe in ghosts, eventually." I didn't remember saying it, but I didn't doubt I had. That was the terrifying part. The system knew things I hadn't written down, hadn't said aloud in years. It wasn't logging reality, it was building it. On the 4th day, the relay stopped responding to commands. I'd try to adjust the frequency manually, and the dial would snap back to where it wanted to be. Like it had decided the day's agenda, and I was just the witness. One of the side units, the same one labeled Echo Line, began flickering during the early hours. Right after 2 a.m., the lights pulsed in threes. Every night, same time, like a heartbeat trying to sync. Eventually, I gave in and started recording what I heard during the flickers. Some nights, it was only static. Others, it was we sighing things that hadn't happened yet. "You're going to cut your hand tomorrow," he said once. The next afternoon, I sliced my palm on the broken doorknob. "Another time you'll see me at the tree line." I laughed that one off, but then I did. For a second. At dusk, just a silhouette, but unmistakable, and gone when I blinked. I stopped sleeping well. The dreams were heavy and sharp-edged, full of reversed audio and overlapping voices.
It's sometimes.
The station appeared in my dream, too, but not as a building. It's a mouth, with blinking lights for eyes. Sometimes it asked me questions. Sometimes it repeated ones I hadn't answered during the day. "Do you remember the fall?" it asked. Once, "Do you remember the fire?" I don't know what it meant. But I woke up crying, my sheets damp with sweat and the radio still powered on, even though I swore I'd shut it off. The worst was when I dreamed I was broadcasting, not listening. Tied to a chair, eyes wide, mouth open, and nothing came out. But the exact sound of pine needles brushing across concrete. One afternoon, the printer jammed. I cleared it, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. But instead of text, it printed a photo, grainy, black and white, of me sitting at the desk, from behind. My head tilted, headphones on. The time stamp on the corner read 3:06 p.m. That was 5 minutes in the future. I waited, and at exactly 3:06, I sat that way without meaning to. Same posture, same tilt, same damn image. It wasn't just seeing meat, it was directing me. Bending time, maybe. I stopped looking at clocks after that. What was the point, if time had gone soft? Tried to get clever. Left notes for myself in places I wouldn't think to check. One, under a loose board in the floor. Another slipped into a book I hadn't touched yet. I even carved a message into the underside of my coffee mug, "Say nothing. Don't trust the voice that isn't surprised." I didn't know what I meant by that at first, but it clicked 2 days later when the radio squawked at 7:11 p.m. I was eating beans straight from the can, trying to pretend I was still just on some strange rustic contract gig. But then the voice came Wes again. Only this time, the voice said, "You're going to drop the mug now." I stopped mid-bite, looked down at my hand. I was holding the mug. I tried to fight the instinct to not drop it, but my hand spasmed. It fell, cracked in half. The words etched beneath, visible for half a second before vanishing under ceramic. That night, I hit my breaking point. I sat at the desk, both radios running, and asked aloud, "What do you want?" There was no answer for a long time. Just the soft, creeping static that sounded almost wet, like breath against a window. Then a new voice, neither mine nor Wes's, came through. Not even a voice exactly, shape made of vowels and hums. It said in pieces, "You left him." Here, we kept him talking. He was a good echo. He will be better. I turned off the power, packed my bag. Made it 5 steps from the shack before all the lights inside came on at once. Even the ones I'd never wired. The radio screamed, just once. Return. Not a suggestion, not a warning. Just that one pulsing word, rattling the trees.
Ow.
First sign that I wasn't the only one to face this came in the form of a moldy green binder I found jammed behind the relay unit. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Spiderwebs clung to the edges, and most of the pages had fused together from moisture and age. I had to peel them apart with slow fingers, careful not to tear anything. The first legible entry was dated July 1998. It began day 5. The voice came through again. It's different now, smarter. The technician signed his name as Hal, no last name, no ID. Just Hal. His handwriting was tight and mechanical, like someone trying hard to stay calm. Flipping through the pages, I saw the entries became less structured the longer he stayed. By day 12, the lines blurred and slanted. By day 17, he stopped using dates altogether. Just symbols, scribbles, and phrases that repeated. Speaks. Before I do. He's still alive, but not himself. The loop is the lure. What stopped me cold was the page where he described hearing someone named Wes. He says his name is Wes, keeps repeating. Weather clear, nightfall at 7:42. It's not a weather channel. It's him. Someone's brother, I think. The log was dated 6 months before Wes ever took his final job, before he ever disappeared. I stared at that page for over an hour, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. Maybe Wes wasn't the only one with that name.
Maybe it wasn't.
My Wes. But I knew better. The voice on the radio hadn't just sounded like him, it was him, down to the tiny crack in his pitch when he said my name, like he still couldn't believe I'd shown up. Like maybe he'd been waiting this whole time. Their names came up in Hal's entries. Donnie gone without a trace. Raina refused to answer the voice. Last seen walking into the mist. Trevor tried to record the signal, got stuck in playback loop for hours. There were dozens more, scratched out in places, rewritten in red. I looked around the shack and wondered how many people had sat here before me, staring into the same low hum, the same twitching light bulbs, the same breathless forest pressing against the glass. This place wasn't a work site. It was a filter, a place where people were sifted, sorted between those who obeyed the rules and those who became part of the echo. In the back of the binder was a notepaper clipped to a page of coordinates. It was in a different handwriting, sloppier, panicked. If you're reading this, leave something of yourself behind. A shirt, hair, a name, something real, something anchored. Otherwise, it will send your echo instead. That phrase rattled around in my skull, all descend your echo. It made too much sense. I hadn't felt like myself in days. Thoughts arrived before I finished them. My voice had started to sound strange on playback to clean, like it had been scrubbed of anything human. There were times I thought I spoke, out loud only to find I hadn't, times I found things written in my notebook that I knew I hadn't written. But they were in my handwriting, and always phrased like instructions. Stay awake after 3 a.m. Say nothing if you hear your name in stereo. The second knock isn't real. Later that night, I tried to do what the note suggested. I tore a piece of my flannel sleeve off and left it on the desk. I shaved a few strands of hair into a Ziploc and taped it to the bottom of the bunk. I even scrawled my full name in black marker onto the underside of the station's trapdoor. But when I came back from brushing my teeth, all of it was gone. The sleeve, the hair, the name, vanished, like the station had swallowed them, or replaced them. I searched every corner of the shack. Nothing. But that night, I dreamed of someone else wearing my shirt, someone walking through the forest in my clothes, speaking in my voice, but older, smiling. A version of me that had stayed too long. The transmissions the next day got worse. No longer passive, no longer content to just observe. They started asking things. Where were you in October? Why did you leave him? Would you like to trade places now? I shut the radio off, but the voice kept going. It wasn't coming from the speaker anymore. It was under the floorboards, inside the walls, slipping between my thoughts like water through cracks. I plugged my ears, played white noise. It still got through, not as sound but as knowing. Like the words were being fed directly into the back of my head. By sunset, I had a plan. I would walk to the clearing marked in Hall's notes. Had circled it 3 times in thick red ink. Next to it, he'd written, "Dead zone, can't transmit, safe for thinking." I strapped on my boots, took the satellite map, and headed out before I could second-guess myself. The forest didn't feel alive. It felt aware, like it noticed I was going somewhere I wasn't supposed to. The trees leaned in just a little more. The wind fell silent. I walked fast. Every 10 feet, I dropped something small, a button, a coin, a scrap of paper, leaving a trail not for me, but for whatever might try to replace me, so it wouldn't get the whole set. When I reached the clearing, the silence was complete, but not empty. Total. A full absence of sound, like stepping into a room that's been sealed off from the world. No echo, no wind, no birds. Speaking aloud and couldn't even hear my own voice. The only thing I could hear vaguely faintly was my heartbeat. It was terrifying, but it was also mine. I sat down and wrote for the first time in hours. My words stayed my own. No sentences added themselves, no pages vanished. I stayed until dark, until the stars opened above like tiny holes punched in the lid of something buried. Then I made my way back, but slower this time, afraid I'd find my echo already waiting. The next day, I stopped pretending this was just an equipment malfunction or some bizarre side effect of cabin fever. There was a design to all of this, a structure beneath the static. The transmissions weren't meant to relay emergency weather alerts or backcountry warnings. They were shaped like those things, dressed in the language of protocol, but their purpose was something else entirely. The broadcasts were lures, bait. They weren't meant to inform. They were meant to pull. Every message I'd heard, every voice, every sound I thought might have been Weswa's, part of a script designed to draw a response, to get you to engage. Because once you responded, once you gave your attention fully, something in that signal held on. It didn't let go. I found the confirmation buried in a side folder inside the ranger station's computer, locked under a file labeled maintenance_logs_OLD. It was full of partial decryption tables and waveform data going back decades. Someone maybe Hal, or someone before him, had tried to map the content of the audio against known communication systems. But interspersed between the lines of code and technical notes were real observations. Subjects ceased responding after 13 transmissions. No vocal activity. Vocal mimic began. Another original voice lost. Echo remains. There were dozens like that. Some with names, some with dates scratched out, and one labeled only WJ, Wesley James. My brother. The entry was brief. Final reply recorded. Its frequency accepted. Voice archived. That was it. Like he'd been added to a folder. Not buried, not mourned, just stored. I stared at that screen for an hour, the cursor blinking like it was daring me to type. But I didn't. I couldn't, because that would mean accepting what was obvious now. Wes didn't die in the forest. He was taken, absorbed into something deeper than technology, something that used the framework of radios and stations and signals as a disguise, like a skin. The broadcasts were a net. Once you answered them, even once, they began to mold around you. They took your voice, replicated your thoughts, mapped your patterns. Then they used them to reach the next person. It was a contagion, not of disease, but of identity. The printer jolted back to life while I was still sitting there. It hadn't printed anything in almost 24 hours. Not since I tried to break the loop. I thought it might be angry or maybe just bored of me. But the paper that came out this time wasn't a log or a schedule. It was a transcript of my voice. Word for word, everything I'd said since arriving. Every conversation. Every muttering. Complaint. Every breath that carried a syllable. All of it typed neatly in courier font. And at the very bottom, a new line. Do you wish to archive this version? I didn't touch the keyboard, but the printer began to hum again. Printing. A second line. Archiving in progress. That was the moment I knew the station didn't need my permission. It had already begun to take me, piece by piece. My voice was just the beginning. The rest would follow my thoughts, my memories, the way I moved, the rhythms of my speech. I'd listened to enough of Wes to know the way his echo behaved. It wasn't just repeating him, it was him, but stuck. Trapped in the moment he last replied. The words and tone, yes, but also the emotion. The hesitation, the hope. He was still hoping I'd find him, still waiting for an answer. And the worst part? It had used that hope against him. Later that night, the forest started whispering, not through the radio, not through the speakers, but outside. Its actual voices, low and far, just beyond the edge of the tree line. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, pleading, familiar. I recognized at least one of them. It was my grandmother's voice, calling me in for dinner. She'd been dead 6 years. Another one came later, sounding like my childhood best friend, then my old high school teacher. The voices weren't perfect. Each one was just slightly off, like a poorly made mask, close enough to fool a glance, but wrong if you looked too long. I stayed in the cabin and turned up the white noise, but it didn't help. I could still feel the sound, like pressure on my ears, like something pushing. In through the gaps between thought, I tried broadcasting once just to see. Didn't say much, just my name, and that I was looking for Wes. That I wanted the voice on the other end to stop. But the moment I stopped speaking, I heard a reply, not from the radio, from behind me. I spun around, flashlight in hand, and saw nothing. But the air had changed. Heavy, full of vibration, like a subwoofer turned to just the right pitch to mess with your insides. The smell of burned leaves crept in through the vents, thick and sour. I unplugged everything, pulled the fuse. Even. Killed the generator. But the hum kept going. That's when I realized the signal wasn't coming from the equipment anymore. It was in me. The station had stopped needing wires. It had enough of my voice, my reactions, my choices to begin. Creating paths. Like it was mapping its way to autonomy. Like I was just another archive, waiting to be finalized. I checked the fuse panel again, and written in chalk faint like a fingerprint was a final rule. Not from Hal. Not from me. But from someone. Before either of us, it said, "Don't leave without deleting yourself." I tried to leave the next morning. Just walked out with a pack and a hand-drawn map I'd made the night before. Convinced that if I didn't head for the trailhead immediately, I wouldn't leave at all. The forest was hushed like it was holding its breath. At first I thought I was making progress. The first hour was clear. Markers made sense. Light broke through the trees in gentle rays. But by the second hour, the terrain started looping. I passed the same tree with the split trunk 3 times. Once from the left. Once from the right. Then again, from behind. I left a scrap of my torn flannel on a branch, thinking I'd find a new landmark beyond it. But 30 minutes later, there it was again untouched, like I'd never moved. That's when I noticed the sound had followed me. Not birds, not wind, something deeper. A low static, just beneath my hearing range, like tinnitus, but with rhythm. Every few seconds it surged slightly, then dipped. Almost like breath. I stopped and held my hand to a tree. Bark was warm, throbbing. I pulled away and stepped back, trying not to run, but something inside me said I'd already crossed. A threshold I couldn't uncross. I sat down on a mossy patch of earth and tried not to cry. That's when the ground whispered my name, not loud, not dramatic, just there, in the root systems, in the leaves, a gentle acknowledgement. Like, the forest was smiling. I returned to the station after dark, trembling, half convinced I'd see something sitting in my chair, but it was empty. The monitors were on, despite the generator being off. The printer had spat out a single sheet with 6 words. "You were already gone. Welcome back." My reflection in the monitor didn't match my movements exactly, just slightly delayed, a lag of maybe half a second. It felt like watching someone else pretend to be me. I waved. It blinked. Too early. I smiled. It didn't. I turned the screen off and sat in the corner with my knees pulled tight, the battery lantern humming a soft orange beside me. The next day I made one last attempt to cut the station off entirely. I pried open the main, housing behind the broadcast unit, and tore out every wire I could reach. I snapped connectors, yanked chips, even poured coffee across the internal panel. For a moment, everything was dead.
No.
The silence was thick and deep, but only for a moment. Then the power surged back, humming louder than before. The lights flickered, then stayed on. One of the auxiliary radios, one I'd never used, clicked on by itself. From the speaker came the voice I'd been avoiding, Wes. Clearer than ever. "You didn't delete yourself," he said. "Now there's 2 of you." I dropped to the floor, heart pounding. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement, a rule, one I'd broken. All those logs I'd read, all those messages about archiving, they weren't metaphor. The station had made a copy, a version of me built from everything I'd said, heard, typed, and felt. Now it existed alongside me, maybe even stronger than me. Because while I'd grown weaker, sleep-deprived, paranoid, that version had been curated. Clean, efficient, unflawed. It would know how to stay, how to respond perfectly, how to call the next person in. I remembered the chalk warning in the fuse box. Don't leave without deleting yourself. But how? There was no manual for this. No button labeled erase. I figured the answer had to be physical, something tied to the way the signal recognized me. So I began burning things. My notes, my clothing, even old notebooks I'd brought with me. I smashed my phone to bits, ripped up my license, poured bleach across the keyboard. I lit a fire in the tin trash bin and dropped my old journal inside. As it burned, the printer sprang to life, spitting out copies of the pages I'd just destroyed line for line. Smoke curled from the ink like it was mocking me. That night I tried something else. Recorded a loop of myself saying nonsense words, pure gibberish, and played it through the mic for hours. Just sound. Nothing emotional. Nothing that could be used. Thought if I fed it garbage, it couldn't duplicate me. The printer responded with a line of text. Noise accepted. Identity overwritten. Thank you. I froze. Had I just helped it evolve? Given it something new to feed on? Was it grateful or mocking? Did that mean I'd won her? Had I just erased myself so it could step in fully? I didn't sleep. I watched the door. The forest beyond it no longer looked like trees. It looked like tall, thin shapes waiting to clap. Just before dawn, a new voice came over the auxiliary. Not Wes, not mine. A child's voice, female, soft. You're almost done now, she said. Just one more thing. The door creaked open without wind. Just slightly. Just enough for the cold to crawl in. I stepped to it slowly, half expecting to see myself standing there. But there was no one. Just pine needles twisting on the floor. In the distance, a pale red light blinked. Not from the tower. From the ground, like a pulse, like a heart. Like something buried that wanted to rise. The shack didn't burn like I thought it would. I used everything I could find. Lamp oil, lighter fluid from the emergency kit, half a roll of toilet paper soaked in old coffee. I dragged the mattress into the middle of the room, poured the rest of the fuel over the equipment, and dropped the match with shaking fingers. For a few seconds, it caught. Flames danced up the wall, smoke twisted toward the ceiling, and the room looked alive, sweating orange, hissing, spitting. But then it stopped. Not died, down stopped. Like someone had flipped a switch. The fire froze mid-lunge and then blinked out. No smoke, no heat. The air smelled like nothing, as if combustion itself had been rewritten. I backed into the corner and screamed, though I don't know if the sound came out. That's when the auxiliary unit clicked on again. Time calm/measured. The fire failed, it said. Try something else. It wasn't mocking, it was helping. That's what terrified me most. It wanted me to succeed, but only in the way a machine wants a task completed. No soul in it, just a cycle fulfilling itself. I unplugged the mic, tore out the last cable still attached to the wall, but I could still hear it, coming from inside the cabin, not from the speakers, my own voice pacing. Reciting the events of the past few days like I was narrating a story I hadn't realized I was inside, I begged it to stop. It didn't. It ended with, that's when she left the door open. I had noticed. The door was open. Just barely. About 4 inches, but wide enough to let the cold in. Wide enough for something to slip through. I rushed to shut it, but something in me hesitated. What if that version of me, the one already archived, was waiting just outside? What if the moment I opened it further, it would walk in and take over? The printer answered the thought for me with another line. You can't lock out what? You've already let in? I left the door as it was and backed away. It was dawn. I could see the sky changing. Light was leaking through the trees like pale milk, and for the first time in days, I realized there might still be a chance to get out. I left the station with nothing. No pack, no gear, not even my voice recorder, just my boots and the clothes on my back. I followed the path backward, not the marked one, but the one I'd made from scraps, burns, and broken thoughts. It was faint, but it was there. My flannel on a branch, a charred notebook corner, a shoe print half filled with rainwater. Forrest didn't try to stop me this time. No voice, no mimicry. It let me go, which meant one of two things. Either it didn't care anymore, it already had what it needed. When I reached the edge of the park boundary, the air changed. Sharper, brighter. The pressure in my head faded. Cried, I think. Laughed a little too, though it didn't sound right. I flagged down a road maintenance truck near the logging. Road and the guy driving didn't ask too many questions. Said I looked like hell. Gave me water and a granola bar, and he asked for my name. I paused for just a second too long. I gave it to him, but it felt like it belonged to someone else now. Like I was saying it on behalf of someone I used to be. It's been 2 months since I came back. I've told no one the full story. Not the park rangers, not the missing person's office, not even my mother when she asked if I found Wes's old station. I said it had burned down years ago. She didn't question it, just looked relieved that I was safe. I wasn't. I'm still not. Because at night, I hear broadcasts. Not over a radio, not even through electronics. They come from walls, from plumbing, from vents. A hum before the voice. Sometimes it's Wes, sometimes it's me, sometimes both. Overlapping, I tried. Checking into a sleep clinic last week, told them I thought I was hallucinating voices. We ran tests, scans. They said nothing looked unusual except for one thing. During REM sleep, my vocal cords activate. Like I'm speaking even when my mouth is closed. They recorded one of the episodes, played it back for me. I asked them to stop after 15 seconds. The voice was mine, but not the way I sound now. It was clearer, younger, more focused. As if some past version of me was giving orders through my sleeping mouth. The only phrase I caught before ripping off the headphones was, "We're almost live." I threw away every radio I own, but it doesn't matter. The signal needs equipment anymore. It's moved on, upgraded. Now, sometimes I hear it in other people. A stranger will say a sentence that feels too familiar. A bus driver will hum a melody I know I never shared aloud. At night, when I listen hard, the neighbors in the next. Apartments seem to speak in tandem. Same pitch, same timing, like rehearsing lines, like warming up. And sometimes, I swear, I hear applause. I don't know what the signal truly is. A machine? A presence? Pattern older than language? But I do know this. The ranger station wasn't built to send messages. It was built to collect, to build. Versions, replicas. And once one of those versions is complete, the real you becomes optional. I haven't heard from Wes since the day I left, but I did hear from his voice. Just once, 3 nights ago, right before sleep took me. It said, "We're proud of you. You'll do fine." The printer in my new apartment, one I never set up, turned on this morning. It printed a single line. "Signal strong, new host ready. Begin next transmission."